Oh boy, JC, it's that time. 2021 CFL Draft about to get underway. The Ticats have the first overall selection. But how are you feeling about this class overall, my man?
Oh, it's a special class when it comes to talent. Now, not all that talent is coming to the CFL this year. There's a bunch of guys that will either be in college next year with the granted eligibility with the NCAA or in the NFL. But it may be, in terms of pure talent, the most talented CFL draft class of all time.
All time, you're telling me?
All time.
So why do you say that overall? You've done a deep dive in terms of watching the film, doing the background research on these players. You follow the NCAA players through the transfer portals and youth sports guys if they happen to go down to the NCAA, which we saw a couple guys go down this past year when the season was canceled. So why do you feel like it might be one of the best classes of all time, even though you're young?
I would say maybe depth-wise, there's other classes that are going to be deeper. We've got a lot less players this year because of the circumstances. But those circumstances have also lent themselves to a lot of NCAA talent, top Division I guys who are all conference, guys who will get NFL interest either already this year or will get it next year. And so in terms of the talent of the players involved, it's far and above any class I've seen before. Now, not all those guys are going to be in the CFL. A bunch of them may stick in the NFL, and that reduces the class's impact for the CFL. But when it comes to talent, these guys are off the charts.
And that to me is the real key here is when you talk about how talented the CFL draft is, you hear from scouts sometimes and general managers, especially the American coaches that come up to Canada, that sometimes they complain about the Canadian talent in the league and not being able to find enough Canadians who are talented enough to play in the CFL. To me, that is absolutely bogus. And the 2021 class shows that in spades. You have 8 players under contract with the NFL, or maybe I should say who earned contracts with the NFL. 4 of those were drafted in the 2021 NFL draft. Defensive back Javon Holland, defensive back Benjamin St. Juste, wide receiver Josh Palmer, and running back Chuba Hubbard. We're talking about 4 players at these skilled positions, not the traditional burly big guys that play on the offensive and defensive lines, but guys that play on the outside that might be looked at as American positions. So I'm curious your take, JC, on that old, tired cliche that there's not enough Canadians to go around.
It's complete bogus, as you said, Dunk. We've seen a transition over the last number of years of players at those skill positions. Now, I'm a line guy, so I don't really like that term, Dunk, but those skill positions moving on to the top level of college football. And what it is, it's the internet age, right? No longer does a scout have to come up here, discover this diamond in the rough, where it's usually a guy who just stands out because of size and you can't miss him. Now that tape's out there. Somebody like Chase Claypool last year, right? He stayed at a AA school in BC, a AA high school, and got discovered by Notre Dame because his tape is out there on the internet for anyone to see.
Exactly. And I really feel like the advent of social media and YouTube and all those types of things help as well, where you can post those highlights and then send it around really easily. You hear the stories of back in the day, and I'm not that super old, but I'm in my mid-30s. And I can remember at that time, it was tricky to be seen by NCAA scouts and to get them to actually watch your film because you had to send the physical tape to them, or probably at that time it was CDs, but still you had to get it in their hands. Although now it's so easy to at least check out a highlight of a Chuba Hubbard breaking off a big run at Bev Facey High School and get intrigued by that guy and then get a bunch of potential Power 5 offers. And I also feel like on our side of the border at the U Sports level, the fact that a number of Canadians are going across the border to the NCAA has really upped their level overall in terms of scholarship money. That's been stepped up. And also the coaching and development of the players. We've seen year after year, especially from either Laval or Montreal or Quebec, that they produce pretty much averaging, I would imagine, 1 per year or close to, a player that's getting looked at by the NFL. Who would have ever thought, let's say 10 years ago, that Laval and Montreal would turn into a place where they would turn out that kind of talent. Across the country, it's obviously there as well. We saw what Carter O'Donnell did coming out of the University of Alberta, earning a practice squad contract with the Indianapolis Colts, staying there all season with the Colts on a talented roster, protecting old man Phillip Rivers, and a guy that they see as a potential future tackle. So the talent up here as well has increased, where you see guys going down to the NFL and earning shots, even though they stay in Canada. The most recent one, I know you love this guy, so I'll give you a chance to talk about him, Pierre-Olivier Lestage.
Oh, man. He is a special, special player. And frankly, I think he's as close to a lock to make the Seahawks roster as any undrafted free agent can be, simply because they only had 3 draft picks this year, and they have a need on the offensive line. So somebody's got to fill it. Now, they signed 3 other guys at that position as well, so he'll have to beat those guys out, but they have a need to fill, and Pierre-Olivier Lestage moves better than almost any lineman I've ever seen in the CFL draft. He gets to the second level. He blocks like a fullback on linebackers. He can go anywhere. You're watching tape, and this guy's 20 yards downfield driving his guy when the running back's already tackled. It's insane, and I think he sticks in the NFL.
And that's really what the Seahawks loved about Lestage, was his toughness. Obviously, you need to have the requisite athleticism to play at that level, and he showed that on his film. He had a virtual pro day. Wasn't really quite the same as I think the hype it would have generated if he had a pro day at the University of Montreal. We've seen in recent years where we've gotten a double-digit number of NFL teams across the border to watch Canadian prospects. But I really feel like when you get a call from Seattle Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll, that's saying something about the talent on this side of the border, that more and more and more they're starting to recognize it. And a lot of people will talk about what happened with basketball in Canada and the NBA in the mini explosion, let's say, that we've seen, right? We had 2 number 1 picks, Andrew Wiggins and Andrew Bennett. To varying degrees, they had success, but still, Team Canada basketball, or Canada basketball, I should say, has a number of talented players. Jamal Murray, although he's injured right now for the Denver Nuggets, is among one of the top rising stars at the NBA level. And I really feel like that same pattern is about to be followed in terms of players going to the NFL and hopefully down the line becoming stars in the CFL. We got to get that quarterback, I really feel like, on either side of the border to really cross that threshold. But overall, to me, it's showing that we're just growing. And it's a cliche, and I normally don't like to use them, but I really feel like we're just scratching the surface in terms of the talent level up here playing football.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Dunk. And that quarterback is coming. Don't worry. There's a couple of guys in the pipeline. A Christian Vieux of Penn State comes to mind as a guy who could be starting at a major school down the line. He'll be a freshman next year. But I think the talent's always been there. It's just the discovery phase that is new. And there's some problems with that. We see the rise of U.S. prep schools and guys going down there, which can sometimes draw away a little bit from that high level of Canadian high school football. So there are drawbacks, but at the same time, you're seeing these guys from Canadian towns on the biggest stages in the world, and it's really cool to see.
All right, we have our first pick in the 2021 CFL Draft. The Hamilton Tiger Cats have selected Jake Burt, tight end, Boston College. JC, what is your reaction?
Wow. That is a shocker to me. Now, we expected Burt to go high. He was a guy who spent all of last year with the New England Patriots on the practice roster. But I was thinking they would go somewhere else here. But this guy fits in quite nicely to the mold of someone like a Nikola Kalinic, who's already on their roster, plays some reps at tight end, can play fullback, H-back. He's athletic. I'm not sure he's athletic as he says he is, but he brings something in the passing game. He's a big dude. He can block really well, and he'll be here this year, and he wants to be here.
Man, that was a bit of a surprise. A lot of people felt like Terrell Jana was going to go number 1 overall to the Hamilton Ticats in an area of need, but perhaps they see Jake Burt as a guy that can fit in and play that receiver position. And hey, when you spend a year with the New England Patriots developing, which with Coach Bill Belichick and offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels, you must be a pretty talented dude. So right now, JC, we'll give you a bit of a breather. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are on the clock, and we'll bring in Rod Peterson here in just a minute. We'll see you in a second. All right, there he is, the man, the one and only Rod Peterson with the Saskatchewan Roughriders on the clock. Roddy, thanks for joining us, man.
Good to hear from you, JD. I'm enjoying your show.
Thanks, buddy. Well, are you surprised about the first overall pick? Let's get your reaction.
I'm surprised in a lot of ways. I saw, obviously, John Hodge's mock draft. He had Terrell Jana going number 1 overall, so I guess he's still on the board. He had Jake Burt going to the Saskatchewan Roughriders number 2. So I'm kind of sitting there wondering, by the way, I'm at virtual Mosaic Stadium, the old one. I don't know if you've noticed that or not.
It looks nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay with the Nelson Locombo pick. My phone's going off. People are telling me that the Roughriders are going to take Joshua Palmer with a number 2 overall pick. But I'm not sure this is reliable. Listen, if you saw Jim Lang's columns on rodpeterson.com about the NFL draft, the misdirection, the misinformation going out there, I'm going to stick with Nelson Locombo. But to answer your question, you're seeing how excited I am for draft night. Jake Burt, number 1. Shocked, but not shocked, because I guess the Ticats needed a receiver. That's what everybody's saying. They didn't have a top flight Canadian receiver. They have one now in Jake Burt. And the reason I don't necessarily think the Roughriders will go with him, just because he was born in Regina and lived there for his first 3 years, they don't automatically owe him to draft him if they feel that, Nelson Locombo is a guy that's ready to come right now. I understand that he is. He's got 2 years of eligibility left with the missed season last year. He would come if he was drafted by the Riders. So that's what I'm expecting to see.
Man, I'm with you in terms of the Ticats and them picking Burt, because a lot of people felt like the receiver position was one of need for them. That's why they might go with Terrell Jana. He had high character as well, but people do speak highly of Burt, and maybe they see him playing in that slot role, but also a versatile guy who could line up a tight end if they want. They have Nikola Kalinic there as well, play some fullback, but the way that he runs, you imagine that he was highly coveted, and that's probably why the Ticats took him first overall, feeling like, hey, at 9, with their second pick in the first round, and thanks in part to that Johnny Manziel deal that's ever given, that they can get a guy later on. But you're on the record as saying Nelson Locombo here. Do you think there's debate in the Riders building, or is this really just GM Jeremy O'Day making the pick?
No, it'll be Jeremy O'Day's pick, because I was told last year there were other guys in that room that wanted to take somebody other than Matlin Riley, and it was Matlin Riley that went in the first pick. Jeremy O'Day is making this selection. But when you talk about a Canadian receiver and who's ready, Jake Burt is pro ready. He spent a year with the New England Patriots. We've been reading all the coverage on 3downnation.com from the video call yesterday, where he said he's spent a year under Bill Belichick. So honestly, Terrell Jana probably would be a tremendous receiver too, but they're getting like a pro-ready guy in Hamilton, and I think it's a tremendous pick. And I just wonder if that kind of threw the Roughriders off kilter a little bit. They're still on the clock. They're taking their full allotment of minutes here. I think when TSN comes back from a commercial, we will get that Roughrider pick. But to answer your question, this is Jeremy O'Day's selection. And for the reasons I outlined today, he went to Matlin Riley last year from the U of S. They've got a great Canadian guard center guard combo in Brennan Labatt, now Evan Johnson and Dan Clark. They've got Matlin Riley as a backup. I don't see them taking an offensive lineman. I think they have a need with Cameron Judge leaving to sign with the Argonauts for a Canadian linebacker. Nelson Locombo, he checks all the boxes. You mentioned character earlier about Terrell Jana. Nelson Locombo checks that box. U of S Huskies checks that box. Need at that position checks that box. That's just what I'm saying. And again, John Hodge admitted in his mock draft that, hey, this isn't going to be maybe even anywhere close. And all of a sudden, boom, the guy that he thought the Riders were going to take is off the board. So it's made things very fun here.
Do you think there's a discussion going on right now in the Roughriders building because Jana is still on the board, even though they might want to take Locombo, like you said, with that need on defense?
But I don't think that the Riders need a receiver. With Justin McInnes and Braden Lenius already in the building, as the guys like to say, and chomping at the bit, by the way, because Lenius is here in town. He's starting this year, Justin. Braden Lenius is starting. So, I mean, yeah, you could bring in Terrell Jana and you could groom them a la the way they have with those two guys, but it's not really a need. Offensive line, to me, isn't a need. Receiver isn't a need. And a lot of guys are predicting, Craig Smith, who you know well, that Kyle Borse is going to be taken. I think the Rough Riders could use a Canadian running back who couldn't always use a Canadian running back, but I don't think necessarily in the first round. So with Bird off the board, I think it'll be Lacombo. But again, my phone's going off saying they're going to take Joshua Palmer. So we're seconds away from finding out who that is.
That's right. Josh Palmer, to me, would be a little bit of a stretch at this point, considering he went in the third round of the NFL draft. And generally, we've seen those players been picked well down the board. But maybe, and as you alluded to, because this is such a unique draft, we see the Riders grab the player here who they believe is the absolute, bar none, best playmaker in the draft. To me, that is Josh Palmer. But the odds of you seeing him are increasingly slim, especially when you consider he went in the third round, the kind of contract he's going to get, and he's probably going to get a lot of chance to earn a roster spot and put a career together there with the Los Angeles Chargers because they spent that draft capital. So to me, that Palmer pick doesn't really make much sense, but what are your people telling you as to why they might go there?
This is just an insider football guy. It's nobody that's in the stadium that's telling me that, by the way. But I saw Farhan's coverage on TSN saying that the big names would go early because of the uncertainty of the Canadian prospects, U Sports prospects that didn't play last year. But I think that's a second, third, fourth round discussion. I'm going to go back to Nelson Lacombo in that he's ready to come now. He's declared his intention. He will leave the University of Saskatchewan if he's drafted by the Saskatchewan Roughriders and signed. I think in the first round, you want guys that are going to show up, guys that are ready, and guys that want to be there. Jake Burt was that. I mean, I saw the quotes where he said, listen, the CFL's calling my name. Canada's calling my name. I'm not kicking tires in the NFL. I'm coming to Canada. Would you not, in the first round, want to take guys that are going to be in training camp?
Exactly. And that's what I wonder about, especially in a hotbed football crazy town like Regina and even the province in Saskatchewan, is with your first round pick, do you really want to take a future player that's not going to be there? Like, how are you going to sell that to your fans if that's the way they went?
Well, I gotta go back and think about past drafts, who if they've taken future players. I'm thinking about David Onyemata was a late round pick. Here it is. TSN's got us the last 5 years for the Rough Riders. Dakota Shepley they waited on, right, in 2018. 2019, Justin McGinnis showed up right away. 2017, Cameron Judge showed up but was hurt. 2016, Josiah St. John was a holdout. So you can see, which we all know. What a story. What a story that was. Here's the pick, by the way.
The Saskatchewan Roughriders select Nelson Lacombo.
Nelson Lacombo!
You nailed it, Rodney.
It's a slam dunk. It was a slam dunk for me, Justin, for all the reasons that I painted. I don't even know what else to say now.
You want to leave on a high note? Rejoin us in the second round?
No, we can kick it around a little bit, but I'm just saying, for all those, listen, I've been around Jeremy O'Day since 1999. I know how the guy thinks. He wants local, he wants a need, he wants high character, and Nelson Lacombo is all those things. I tell you what, they're celebrating in Saskatoon today, which incidentally, he, as you know, he's an Abbotsford, BC kid, but in the football capital of Canada, U of S is under your umbrella. He's a local kid as far as Rider fans are concerned.
Definitely. And I think he's embraced that there. I was out there covering many of his games doing the Canada West Football Showcase games. And Lacombo, as you said, checks all those boxes. High character kid, work ethic is there, gets after it on the field. Looks like he plays at a different speed. And I really feel like even though, yeah, he's from BC, you forgot about that because he's been in the prairies for so long. So I'm sure that made the Riders a little more comfortable with the pick, thinking, well, he's been in Saskatchewan. He knows what it's like here. He's used to it. He's not necessarily going to leave us after his rookie contract and just go back to the West Coast.
Absolutely not. All those things, you're right. But I do think, I liked the way John Hodge was thinking with the BC Lions could use some help with Canadian playmakers on defense. His older brother is there. But I've had Bo Lacombo on my show. I haven't interviewed Nelson, but if Nelson's anything like Bo, you're talking about just a character guy. I don't know if he's a clone of Bo or not, but just the reports that I've got are outstanding. I've seen him play live with the Huskies, but I've never talked to the kid. But it sounds like we're going to be talking to him a lot here. And I was screwed up in my head with them not playing in 2020. I thought he was going into his fifth year, but they missed a year, right? Everything's been pushed. but he's still ready to. And by the way, here's the guy saying they were going to take Josh Palmer. He's just saying they should have taken Josh Palmer. But why? Why would you take a guy from Mississauga that played at Tennessee that nobody really knew until the last couple of months, when you got a guy that's going to come into your program and fit right in? And with other Canadians in the secondary where he might find himself, Mike Adam, Eli Bauka, like they got a pretty good crew back there on defense of Canadians. And with Judge leaving, I don't know that Lukambo will be the next Cam Judge, but this guy's a player.
Certainly is, my man. Roddy, thanks for jumping on. We'll get back to you in the second round, right, when the Riders make their next pick and get all that good analysis and Sasky feel from you.
I'll be here, bud. I'm just getting a screenshot of our visit. Okay.
All righty. We'll see you later.
Good job.
All right, Mr. Abbott, back with us, our lead CFL draft analyst. I got to ask you, buddy, are you still feeling the reverberations of Jake Burt?
I'm feeling the reverberations personally, but I don't think the Saskatchewan Roughriders did, because this is pretty much par for the course for what I expected them to do. And it's the right pick in my mind. Nelson Lukambo won the President's Trophy as U Sport's best defensive player for a reason. The kid is special. He seems to play almost at a different speed as everyone else. Like he's a different animal on the football field. He processes so fast. He's so explosive. He changes direction. I think he can really play anywhere in the secondary, even at Sam linebacker if they wanted him to. And I think he's a perfect guy to sit behind Mike Adam. For right now. I think they're very similar in some regards.
All right, we got the Bombers on the clock. Let's get John Hodge in here. We'll get back to you in just a second. All right, JC? The one, the only, Mr. John Hodge, the best Bombers reporter out there. Are you stunned at number 1 overall? I got to ask you, buddy.
Woo! I had a CFL veteran personnel guy text me literally seconds after my CFL mock went live today at it was 12 noon Eastern, and he said, "Look, there's no way a tight end is going number 2 in the CFL draft. It's just not happening." And he was right, because Jake Burt number 1. So I was shocked. The Ticats traditionally, I mean, let's remember they didn't actually have tight ends, fullback types really on the roster for a long time. CO Prime was there like 4 or 5 years ago. They never really replaced him until 2019. The draft comes around. They draft Nikola Kalinic out of York at the top of the second round. I'm a huge Kalinic fan. I thought he was spectacular as a rookie there. Caught a touchdown pass, was great on special teams. I thought, okay, if they've got Kalinic, they're not even going to consider Jake Burt. And the reality is he was the number 1 pick. And I'm surprised they passed on Terrell Jana. I thought Jana was a real option for the Riders at 2. Turns out that is not the case. They've gone for Nelson Lukambo, and I'm interested to see if Jana's availability affects what the Bombers plan to do at 3rd overall.
Yeah, the Bombers might be sitting in a great spot here where they can get a player that they never really thought was going to be on the board. And just going back to the Ticats for a second, we were all looking at that receiver position as a need spot for them on, to be quite honest, a stacked roster. But maybe they really feel like Jake Burt can be a receiver and a big physical receiver. We got to remember, Andy Fantuz was loved by Kent Austin. And who was his offensive coordinator? It was Tommy Condell. So that, I think, went overlooked in this process. And I'm sure, just knowing how much homework he does, that Drew Alamang, I'll call him their lead Canadian scout, not just the co-manager of football operations, would have done his research and known that Burt was eligible, but it just came to light. So I'm sure they did extensive background research, even though there were a lot of varying opinions out there, and I'm sure you heard them too, Haji, on Jake Burt and why he was re-signed by the Patriots and all of a sudden was so focused on the CFL draft. So to me, you get this guy at number 1 overall. The Ticats really feel like he's going to fit into that locker room that is ultra important to them. And Jake Burt's character does seem to be very high. The Bombers are on the clock. What do you think the conversations are that are going on inside the building with Kyle Walters and Mike O'Shea?
Well, I think honestly they're going to have a sense of surprise that Terrell Jan is still on the board. Nelson Lacombo was rumored for a long time to be the number 2 overall pick to the Riders. I think he would have been in play for Winnipeg, to be quite honest. I think that's their biggest area of need. With him off the board, however, if you're the Bombers, if you want to take Terrell Jana as a quote-unquote now player, a guy who's really going to help you in 2021, I think it's a great move. They lost Daniel Peterman to the NFL, and Jan is a guy who could come in and help spell Nick Dembski at the slot back position. Drew Olatarski is another kind of true slot who they just play at Z because that's the spot they have available at field side wide receiver. But I would not be surprised to see the Bombers take a future here. They've got a relatively loaded roster. They just won a Grey Cup. They've got a 2020 draft class still coming in. I thought they did well last year. So I'm really excited to see who they take. I think they could take a now. I think they could take a future.
It's just come in, and you might be surprised at this one, Hodge. With the 3rd overall pick in the 2021 CFL Draft, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have selected offensive lineman Liam Dobson. Your take?
I think it's a great pick. I had Pierre-Olivier Lestage to them in my mock. I had them going future O-line. I think Dobson is a great pick. Liam Dobson is the only 340-pound offensive lineman I know who can dunk a basketball, which is a remarkable feat of athleticism. I'll post a video on it on social media. I've got it on my phone. But he's originally from Ottawa, played at Canada Prep Academy. My favorite thing about him, he played defensive tackle until his final year of high school, and he really approaches the game like a defensive player. He is an attacking offensive lineman. Played tackle at Maine, probably switches to guard at the pro level. However, he is going back to school. Transferred to Texas State. He's going to play for the Bobcats in 2021, and he could draw NFL interest in 2022. That said, if Dobson ever comes north, I think he has the potential to be a perennial all-star at guard. And by the way, arguably the best offensive lineman in CFL history, whose picture is right there, 16 years for Winnipeg Blue Bombers, converted defensive lineman. So I'm not saying Liam Dobson is the next Chris Walby, but there's some parallels there that I think Bomber fans can get excited about.
You kind of just did, man. And it makes a lot of sense when you get who some people feel like might be the most pro-ready. And even though he's not coming this year, but by pro-ready, I mean a guy that when he does get here can step in right away and play with his body. Everyone looks at the belly and the slam dunks are nice, but you ultimately got to play football at some point. And this guy could be a 10-year starter in the league at guard. He's that good. Don't let his size fool you. He can move around pretty good, right?
He moves around very well. Now, the thing I'll say is if he moves pretty darn well at 340, he's going to move brilliantly at 305. So I definitely think if he comes up to Canada to play the Canadian game, which he did grow up playing again at Canada Prep Academy in Welland, Ontario, I think that he would be smart to cut some weight. But the fact that, again, he moves as well as he does at 340 is remarkable. I think he can play that size. I just think to increase the longevity of his career, take some stress off those joints, he would be wise to cut some weight and take his already great mobility and make it fantastic.
Mean and lean, man. You know what I'm saying?
Lean and mean. As somebody who's had to cut weight in the past, it's an important thing to be able to do. So I think that Dobson is in a great position with the Blue Bombers. And again, I think the future makes a lot of sense for them. Terrell Jana would have helped, but they've got a loaded roster and they don't have a lot of space for players. So when in doubt, draft a future lineman. And obviously Dobson was the one at the top of their board because they took him at 3rd overall.
All right, real quick before we let you go, we have a scenario here where Terrell Jana, the Vancouver, BC native, is on the clock with BC on the clock. Or is on the board with BC on the clock, I should say. Do you feel like that's where BC could go? What's your intel say?
I think there's a chance, though. If I'm the Lions, I think I need help at DB. I think I need help at offensive line, and I need help at defensive line. I could see Mohamed Diallo as a futures pick. I could see Daniel Joseph as a futures pick. I could see Patrice Rene, Dean Leonard, any of the talented defensive back features that are here. But if you're taking a now guy, you may as well take Jana. He's from Burnaby, and you play a lot of Canadian receivers. They have some great ones in Lamar Durant, in Shaq Johnson. We don't know if Javon Katoy is going to be back there, but hey, you can't pass up great local talent. I had Nelson Lacombo to them at 4 for this reason, originally from Abbotsford. I think if you can go local, find an impact player, you really can't go wrong in the CFL draft.
All right, my man, you've been busy crushing it out and will for the entire draft. So what you really should be doing if you're watching the live stream right now is have 2 screens open. Hodge with the written details and the analysis of every single pick, all 54 in the draft, all 6 rounds. And on the other screen, you have the live stream. So you get the best of both worlds. We'll let you get back to it, Hodgie. We'll see you back here in the 2nd round for the Bombers pick.
We'll see you then. My pleasure.
All right, back to our lead draft man, JC Abbott. You're out in British Columbia. Do you feel like Terrell Jana should be the pick with him being the hometown boy from Vancouver?
He's who I would select at this point. I didn't expect him to be available at 4. You play a lot of Canadian receivers, as Hodge mentioned, and he's a guy, let's forget his on-field stuff for a second, because we'll talk about that when he gets picked. But off the field, he's a local kid who's going to be stellar in the community. He's a special person. This is a kid who last year at the University of Virginia, with all that was going on in the world, decided, you know what, as a tribute to the people who helped build this university, who were enslaved, whose names are not remembered, I'm going to take my nameplate off my jersey as a tribute. He won the Community Service Award for the University of Virginia as well. So this is a kid who's going to be special for your team with all the other things he does, and potentially be a perennial 1,000-yard receiver on the field.
That's what I'm saying. It might not be an area of need for them, but at this point in the draft, I don't necessarily think the BC Lions and co-general managers Rick Campbell and Neil McAvoy would have foreseen Jana being available. All the talk leading into the draft, and the Ticats clearly played it very well, was that Jana would go 1, and there was even a sense that he was a lock there. But we've seen Jake Burt has changed all of that. So if it's not Terrell Jana, where else might the BC Lions go here at number 4?
Well, the thing that everyone's going to talk about is the need along offensive line. I think you can wait on that. I think you can grab a guy a little bit later if you have to. There are players available who could help you right now. The Bryce Bells, Logan Bandys, Peter Nicastros of the world, which would all be solid selections. But the guy I had them taking in our mock draft was Ben Halatic, another local kid. He's from Vernon, BC. He played at UBC. I think he's special, gives a different aspect to a linebacking core that's going to start 2 Canadians next year. He can rush a little off the edge. So I think that would be a really solid selection as well. Or you could take potentially a futures in Mohamed Diallo. I look at the interior of their offense, or of their defensive line rather, and I see a lot of holes. Even the Americans are complete unknowns, and the only Canadian playing there is Court Hammond, who was drafted last year. So if you can upgrade that position, that would be a smart choice, but it's not going to help you this year.
That's right. So many options on the board here right now, and really, it's a new look for the BC Lions overall, right? Because just a year ago, Ed Hervey was the general manager, not there anymore, and it's the first year for the co-GMs making the pick. So you ultimately wonder who gets the final call, because you're going to have, in let's say a quote normal draft room, input from everyone around the table. But to me, based on what the Red Blacks' former coach, I should say, Campbell, has done since he's went to BC, I think Campbell has the final call. So if that's the case, do you get any indication, because Campbell's a defensive guy, that that's the way that he might lean?
I think there's some indication there. The problem with that line of thinking is how Campbell has used his picks in the past in Ottawa, or how they selected in Ottawa. They had a lot of depth guys on the defensive line. They had safeties that they played as Canadians. I'm not sure there's a guy for right now that's proper value at those positions that can help you today. So that weighs into the factor. There's some guys who can help you in a year or 2 at those positions, but maybe not right now.
Intriguing. Well, the BC Lions seem to be eating up all of the time on the clock. You wonder if they're entertaining possible trade options. There were people that felt like if Trail Janet did fall down the board, that he might be of interest to the Ottawa Red Blacks. But it seems like it would be hard to pass up that local kid who is pro-ready and can come in right away and compete for you. That said, as you've mentioned, Ben Hladek is very much in the same mold. A guy that people felt like in a non-pandemic time, if he could have had a pro day and had NFL scouts time him and test him and get a close look at him, that he might have had an opportunity to sign as an undrafted free agent or even get to a rookie minicamp and maybe impress down there. It's been a while since a Canadian linebacker was drafted in the NFL. I believe you got to go all the way back to 1995. However, Hladek has those kind of traits. So you got a couple of local guys sitting right in front of you that are ultra talented. You got to make the pick, JC. We'll put you on the clock, and I'm sure the Lions will follow here with their pick. Where would you go if you were sitting in that GM chair for the Lions?
It's a tough place to be, but I'm taking Terrell Jana. He's simply too good to pass up. I know it's not a position of need. You were going to have to add probably a depth Canadian receiver at some point in this draft anyway. But this is a guy that's way more talented than that is falling into your lap, and a local kid to boot. So that's where I'm going 100 times out of 100.
You know, my heart lies on the offense, but I just find it difficult for Campbell to pass up, and I'm going to put my head and try to get inside his brain. A defensive guy in Ben Hladek that you know has been a stud there at the U Sports level and can come in right away and contribute on special teams. I'm not saying Janet can't, but historically, linebackers and defensive players much better on special teams. Now, when we get veteran receiver Natea J in here, he might argue because he's carved out a pretty good role on special teams himself. So he'll be in here for the Edmonton football team pick and the Toronto Argos pick, and maybe even Montreal. But I just have a hard time seeing Campbell going against that. And somebody brought this up to me the other day that the first draft pick that the Ottawa Red Blacks ever had was Antoine Pruneau, a defensive player, a ratio breaker. Hladek, I don't really feel is at that level, especially instantly. But we're going to see if he follows that same mold here at 4 overall.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a different situation this time around, because whether you go with Jana or you go with Hladek, neither are positions where they have to start day one for you. At linebacker, you've got Jordan Williams, who you took first overall last year, who's going to be a plug-and-play starter this year. You've got Bo Lacombo. You've got Adam Konar. You've got Isaiah Guzlak-Messam. I mean, you're rich at the linebacker position. Now, Hladek has a very different skill set, I think, than all those guys. Lacombo and Guzlak-Messam are more coverage guys. Jordan Williams he's an American for all intents and purposes. He can do it all. But Ben Hladek is a guy you can stick on the edge. And I think that's where he gets on the field early. If he's not starting at linebacker, he plays special teams and he does very, very well there. But I think you can get him reps as a rotational defensive end, and he'll get after the quarterback.
And the pick is in, my man. With the 4th overall pick in the 2021 CFL Draft, the BC Lions select Daniel Joseph, defensive lineman, North Carolina State University.
Well, we're talking about sort of the right sort of area in position when I was saying rushing off the end, but the wrong player. And Daniel Joseph is a fantastic defensive end for NC State. He started out as a 4-star recruit, went to Penn State, didn't really perform there, didn't see the field a whole lot, made a couple plays, but was more of a rotational player. And he wanted to stand out this year, so he transferred to NC State, and he absolutely broke out. He was one of the best defensive ends in that conference, put up 6.5 sacks, which led all Canadians last year in the NCAA. And he's got really, really intriguing tools. He's long-armed. He's athletically gifted. Now, I'm not sure he bends super well. He's not that guy who's going to round that corner super quick, which is why he might not have as much NFL interest next year after he returns to school, which is why this is a good selection and he'll come to the CFL. But he's a guy who can absolutely rush the passer at a high level in the CFL at a position of need for the BC Lions where they don't really have any Canadians, but they would like to.
defensive pick for Rick Campbell, the defensive guru. JC, we got Edmonton on the clock, and Natey Adjei is just waiting here. He's been patiently backstage. So let's bring him in here. JC, we'll get back to you real quick, my man. All right. The man, he's been so patient backstage. Natey, first, I got to flash this up for a second. Take a look at this swag that this guy's bringing here. Oh, my goodness. Look at that, bro. This is the kind of swag Natey's bringing in here, man. How you doing?
Oh, yeah, man. You always have to bring the swag, man. They say you look good, you play good, they pay good. So that's what I'm trying to bring, man.
I take it. Edmonton's on the clock, but man, my first question to you today after I saw that picture with you rocking that rainbow visor was, did you get fined for that? Can you let the people know what happened?
Yeah, man. So I have the visor, man. I had it for a while, and I've been contemplating wearing it because I'm allowed to wear a dark visor. But with that rainbow visor, the CFL is quick to find. They love to, get some money out of their players' pockets. But I was contemplating wearing it. I'm like, okay, it's getting close to the end of the season, so I actually wore it our last game of the season against the Rough Riders, and I get a letter, the day after the game, the CFL is finding you or is warning you for an illegal tint on your visor. I'm like, all right, cool. I got a warning, and I put it away. Then playoffs start to come, and I'm like, it's gonna be Hamilton. The sun is gonna be shining. It could possibly be our last game of the year. Let me put this on. So I decided to put it on. Just say forget the fine. Whatever happens, happens. So I wear it. Got some great pictures from Joanny Dutres, and she does a fantastic job for the league. End up getting fined after. I knew it was coming, but they said, hey, it's your last game, so we will fine you the next time you guys have a game, the next game you guys have. And that was our last game. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'll just get fined next year. I don't care. Next thing you know, we didn't have a season next year, and I still got my money in my pocket. So that's the story with that visor.
Man, that visor's hype. Honestly, how do you even find those these days?
Man, those are impossible to find. Like I spent seriously since high school, and I used to see guys like Sean Taylor, rocking those at Miami, right? I'd get inspired, and I've been looking all over for visors like that, and I can't even remember where I got that, but I've had it for a while. I think one of the where did I get? Oh, you know who gave it to me? Wheezy, the legendary equipment manager in Edmonton. So one day I was snooping around back in our equipment room, and I was just looking around and walking around. Next thing you know, something shiny was blinding me. I'm like, wait, what is that? And I look up, and it's one of those visors, and he's like, no, don't even think about it, Natey. I know what you're gonna do. I'm like, Wheezy, please. This will take my swag to the next level, Sweezy. This might get me another contract in the CFL. He's like, no. He said no for 8 weeks straight. And then one day I'm like, Wheezy, if I score a touchdown this week, can I get the visor? He's like, you're not going to score a touchdown? No way. And then he said he agreed to that. And it was that game in BC where I had the screen pass for a long pass. And as soon as I scored that touchdown, I was so happy. I went back to the sideline and said, Wheezy, it's time.
For the uninitiated, the people that don't know, who's Wheezy?
Wheezy, Dwayne Manduzak, legendary equipment manager in Edmonton. Over 50 years, or just about 49 years as an equipment manager in Edmonton. Legendary. Everybody knows him. He's got stories for days. Just the man, the myth, the legend, Dwayne Manduzak. You
clearly have stories for days, and I'm curious your story on this next pick for the Edmonton football team. It's in number 5 overall. The EE football team has chosen Cole Nelson, defensive lineman, University of Alberta. How do you feel about that? Being a football team member?
Well, I know Brock Sunderland. He's the kind of guy, aggressive general manager, right? He's going to take the best player available. And I thought they would go Mohamed Diallo here just because the fact that he played in the NCAA, he was vicious. The games that I've watched, he was vicious, playing inside, playing outside. I thought they'd go there. But Edmonton has got sneakily a strong defensive line. You look at, they lost Amondo Sewell, right? But they still got Mike Moore, Jake Serezna, Kwaku Boateng, a budding superstar, and Matthew Betts, a guy that drafted in the first round last year who went to the Chicago Bears and came back. So, they have low-key 3 Canadian defensive linemen who they believe that they can play. And, that's a great way because it shows you they probably thinking about playing 2 Canadians on the edge, and drafting a D lineman here gives us flexibility to be able to do that.
And you've been a player that's coming into the league and trying to make a name for themselves and a career. And I'm curious how you view that. You were a 3rd-round pick, 22nd overall, originally by the Argos, went out to Edmonton, come back to Toronto. You're now officially a member of the Montreal Alouettes. But what's it like on draft day to hear your name called?
Dude, draft day, it's like almost a culmination of everything, you've worked for your entire life. So as soon as you set the goal that, you want to be a professional football player, that's the day you're looking forward to, because that's when your name gets announced. It just tells you that your dreams, goals, and aspirations have all come true that day. I remember that day clearly. I remember like it's yesterday. All these guys getting drafted today will never forget this day. It's probably the most special feeling that you will ever have. I was on a natural high for about 2 weeks just because I was getting drafted to my hometown team, and I was fulfilling my lifelong dream of becoming a professional football player. And it just the whole day, like the texts coming, the phone calls, your middle school teacher hitting you up, telling you they're proud of you, your parents, being proud of you, all that, it just makes you feel so good. It just gives you an unbelievable feeling that, a lot of people, this is special. A lot of people don't get an opportunity to become a professional in their field, right? So this is a awesome day for these guys, and that day I guarantee you they'll never forget.
The Ottawa Redblacks are on the clock, 6 overall, but I think we're going to stay with you. The Toronto Argos are on there at 7. Obviously, you remember that organization, drafted by them. So we'll keep you with us. Do you remember where you were on draft day, and did you plan it out?
Yeah, I remember where I was. So I had this longtime trainer, Jesse Corona. He trained me since I was 15. He's the guy that kind of, instilled like belief in me that he thought I could make it professionally. Before then, I played like all kinds of sports. He's like, man, football is probably going to be your sport and you're going to go professional. I'm like, really? Why do you think that? He's like, he just knew. So he trained me all through high school, all through college. And, I thought it was fitting to have it at his gym in Mississauga. So we had a little draft party at his gym, invited all my friends, invited everybody that went to that gym. It was like inspiration for the younger guys at that gym. They were all invited. It was such a cool moment because it was like a combination of, his belief in me and my putting in that work in that very gym. So it was so cool. I remember, like I told you, like it was yesterday. We had cake. I remember everybody that was there. I can remember the faces now. I remember the emotion. Another thing on that day is my best friend, Chris Rossetti, was a scout for the Toronto Argonauts. I think at the time he was the director of Canadian scouting. And so I grew up with Chris, spent almost every day at his house playing NCAA and Madden, all that, going to football practice. He gives me the call to tell me, hey, buddy, we're trading up to come and get you. And it couldn't have been scripted any better. I was at the gym where my longtime trainer was at, and my best friend calls me to tell me you're getting drafted by the Argos. Unbelievable days, like things that you write about in movies.
Dude, seriously, that's what these moments and events are made of, man. Like that just brings the feels to me. I know Chris Rossetti, he was a backup quarterback for me at the University of Guelph, has actually gone on from the Argos to be a scout now with the Miami Dolphins. So it shows you, like, I don't care where you come from in Canada, you can make it in the game of football. And you as a player, Chris Rossetti, your boy, as a scout, even though people would laugh at that, right? Like they would think that, Canadian guy, and Chris in this instance, could never be a scout in the NFL. Well, he's shown that that's possible, right? Have you kept in touch with him?
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking today about the Dolphins draft, and I was telling him, man, I'm a big fan of their first round pick, Waddle there, and I'm like, bro, when I see myself in my head, I think I move like Waddle. Obviously, I don't, but that's who I when I have dreams. That's who I envision I look like. But yeah, no, we're really tight. Obviously, COVID, a lot of things. We were supposed to have a big family meeting in Miami. Obviously, that's having been postponed. But yeah, no, he's doing unbelievable things. Like you said, man, this guy used to, sit at home. We'd have the NCAA video game, and he'd have to put in every single name in the roster because back then they didn't have any. I don't know if they don't even have the game now, but you have to put in every single game. He'd get the magazine with all the rosters, and that's when you knew this guy is willing to sit here for a week when we get this game before even playing it. We'll put in every single guy. On the roster, he would have their 5-star Rivals rating. He'd be on Rivals all the time, and he was just made for that. So it doesn't matter where you come from. I know you were talking about it earlier with the boom in basketball, man. It doesn't matter where you come from. You like this a night like this showed you can make it from anywhere. And guys, in this draft. They're coming from all walks of life. Some of them doubted. Some of them were supposed to be here. Some of them were not. It just shows you that anybody can make it if they put their mind to it. And this is a night that shows that.
Indeed, my man. And for anybody that doesn't know, we're talking about Chris Rossetti, who used to be a scout for the Argos, played quarterback at St. Michael's College in Toronto, and then at the University of Guelph with me. Jim Barker, who most CFL followers will know, brought him in and gave him his start as an Argos intern, doing media relations stuff, like dealing with me and giving out stats and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, he puts his stamp on what he's doing. And as you said, that video game reference, I remember, dude, he made the entire OUA. Every single team, every single player, gave them attributes. And guys on the University of Guelph team would go and play, and they'd be like, what? I deserve a higher rating. I'm faster than this. I'm stronger than this. Like, what the heck is this? But Chris, to his credit, always defended it, and he was unbiased. Even though he maybe had his Mississauga guys that were with him at the University of Guelph, he was unbiased. So it shows you that for people that want to follow a Canadian on the player personnel side of the NFL, Chris Rossetti is definitely a guy with the Miami Dolphins, and he did it the right way. A lot of hard work and sacrifice and chasing his dream. And we have the 6th overall pick. It's in, oddly enough, a guy from around the GTA. Deshaun Stevens is chosen 6th overall by the Ottawa Redblacks. List him as a linebacker. He might be more of a defensive lineman in the CFL, but what say you, Nate?
Yeah, so Deshaun Stevens, he's a guy I know. He's from the GTA area. He's a guy that's in the same situation I kind of was, right? Because he's got another year of eligibility in the NCAA, and he's looking to transfer right now, right? But I know he was a guy that was kind of looking forward to being drafted by Toronto, and he gets taken a pick early. He came out earlier this week. I saw the quote. He says, I would love to play for my hometown team, Toronto Argonauts. I think the Red Blacks saw that and were like, we're not letting him get to the Argos at pick 7. So they took him early. I think he's a guy that's going to be extremely excited when he gets into the CFL, because he's a guy that is so versatile, right? You say defensive lineman, linebacker, right? But in the CFL, when you first come into the league, you got to be able to produce on specialty. So, right, when I look at his body type, I see a guy that can come in right away and produce and make a roster because of his ability on specialty. And then you figure out the rest later, like his position or where he can play. Because once you get on the roster, anything can happen on that field. And next thing you know, you're actually in offense or defensive situations, right? So, no, I think he was looking forward to going to Toronto, but in Ottawa, he's going to be playing in front of sold out crowds. It's a 5-hour drive away. He'll be fine. He'll love it there.
All right, the Toronto Argonauts are on the clock with the 7th overall pick. You're a member of the Argos, obviously, after you got drafted there. You re-signed. You wanted to play there in 2020. Mm-hmm. You end up now you're with Montreal. But what's it like to play for your hometown team? You talked about it with Deshaun Stevens wanting to play for the Argos growing up here. Football, as much as people say that Toronto doesn't care about it, I disagree. Mississauga, a football hotbed. Brampton, oh my God, the ballers that come out of there. So for you, what was it like to play for the Double Blue and get drafted by them too?
Yeah. Oh, special. Literally today, I was talking to Dejan Brissett, and I'm a member of the 2020 draft class by Toronto. And, he's a guy that is super excited to play in the city because his brother's here and his family's here. And I was telling him I was literally reliving everything I went through from, the ticket requests, from everybody. And it's a blessing to have those ticket requests because, we saw with this past season, nobody was asking anybody for tickets. And you kind of miss that kind of the game. And playing in front of your friends, your family, because a lot of these guys, they go to colleges like Deshaun. He's been in Maine, right? He hasn't played, in front of any of his friends or family, or what I mean, from back home in a long time. He, when you get by your hometown team, that's the first thing that you love about. You get to play in front of people you love. Get ticket requests left, right, and center. It could get annoying at times, but those are things you miss when it's gone. You get a chance to play for the team you grew up cheering for. There's nothing that is better than playing for a team you grew up cheering for, and you get to make a difference. That's an unbelievable feeling that a lot of people don't get to experience, and there's something special. Can you imagine, going watching your favorite team every week, and then growing up and getting to help that team? There's honestly nothing better in the world. So that's what some of these guys are going to be going through today, and playing for your hometown team is really special. And a lot of people don't get that opportunity. You look at it's getting better in the CFL, but you look at in the CFL or any other professional sports league, it's so rare to have a guy playing for his hometown team and making a difference.
The Argos are on the clock here, your hometown team, your childhood team. You know the roster really well because you signed with them for the 2020 season. Where do you feel like they could go here?
Yeah, I don't see them going receiver. They're stacked at receiver. That's probably one of the reasons I'm not there, right? They're stacked at receiver. You look at, Breskison, especially Canadian receiver, Breskison. You look at Brissett, Levi Noel, just a bunch of guys that are ready to play right away, right? And they got, unbelievable talent evaluators there that do such a great job. I can see them going anywhere with this. I know they want to start Canadian DB. They got, last year's draft, they drafted Jack Cassar and they brought in Enoch Mwamba. So, linebacker, they might want to add depth there. They might want to add depth with the DB position. O-lineman, you can never have too many good Canadian O-linemen. The only position I see them not going is receiver. And watch, they might just draft the Canadian receiver. But no, I don't see them going there. I see a lot of maybe linebacker because they may play 2 Canadian linebackers. We'll see. They got pretty good depth already, but so with these 2 draft classes back to back, you're going to see a lot of teams is going for sometimes the best player available because you already built up your depth from last year.
You're right, man. And it does seem like the Argos are in that position to do so. I really think that they could use another offensive lineman, though. That would make some sense because, some of the guys that they do have are maybe a little more veteran, although Dariusz Bladek did sign there as a free agent, but Philip Blake is a little older. There's been some speculation whether or not Tyler Holmes will even come back. So some of the guys like that. So put another guy in the pipeline to replenish that situation. But you can get talented offensive linemen in this draft later on. Like, we got to remember, it's a snake format, so the Argos are going to be back up on the clock here fairly quickly. So I'm sure they're thinking what you said. Do they go best player available here and then take an offensive lineman later? If you were in the chair, where would you go?
Yeah, I would go. You know what? I'll break some news for you. I'm good friends with Tyler Holmes. He's actually officially retired. So there you go. So they, with that being said,
on the show, man, break that news.
I got it, man. Oh, I could definitely see them going Canadian linemen. Like you said, that's not a position of strength right now. And in the draft like this, when you get an opportunity to double up and you've already secured your skill positions, you have to go with the line because we know in the CFL, the team that goes the furthest is the team with the best line and the team with the best depth. So that's one thing you want to do in the CFL draft. And there's no better time to do it now in the first round because those guys – good quality linemen, they go fast. Like we've seen past drafts where the first, 6, 7 picks are all linemen, right? So because they're that important.
Yeah, it's honestly surprising to see. And if you're just joining us, where we cap the quick picks really quickly, the Ticats at number 1 select tight end Jake Burt out of Boston College. The Riders at number 2 take Nelson Lacombo, defensive back, University of Saskatchewan. The Bombers at number 3 take offensive lineman Liam Dobson. Through 6 picks, he's the only O-lineman to go. At number 4, the BC Lions take Daniel Joseph, defensive end, North Carolina State. At 5, Edmonton, Cole Nelson, defensive lineman, University of Alberta. And then 6, Deshaun Stevens, linebacker / defensive lineman from Maine. So as you mentioned, normally, and a lot of people feel like that's why the CFL draft is boring in a sense, as much as I know JC Abbott and my colleagues John Hodge like their big men. And I do. You got to protect the quarterback, right? So we can get the ball off and get it to receivers like you. But it's the skills, right? It's the quarterbacks that really make the NFL draft, I think, so sexy because they get picked high and they alter franchises right away. So to me, I like that we're having the skill positions here, but I'm a little curious from your perspective. Do you feel like it's a little different in the CFL draft to make the jump to the Canadian League that it might be in the NFL draft? Because we see those guys that get picked high in the NFL draft essentially start from day one.
Yeah, like you were saying, the parallel to the quarterbacks being picked high and having an immediate impact. It's almost like the NBA, where guys, you're 19 years old, 20 years old, come in and we're expected franchise saviors, right? And that's why those drafts are so intriguing because the guys that are picked, especially in like the top 10, they're going to come in, they're going to be playing immediately, and we don't really see that in the CFL, right? Because like in the past, guys get drafted, especially for me. I remember I come in, there's Andre Derry there's Mike Bradwell, there's Spencer Watt, right? And there's a list of Canadian receivers ahead of me, Anthony Coombs as well. And, there's only so many Canadian spots, right? So you're thinking, okay, maybe wait a while, maybe let Andre get a little bit older, and then maybe I can slide right in there, right? So that's what it is for a lot of guys in the CFL, where, you get drafted and pretty much, you're not going to be a starter immediately. That's why special teams in the CFL is so important. That's why it's important for a lot of these guys to understand special teams where you're going to get on the roster. It took me a couple years to understand that, but when I finally understood that, it was all good. It made life a lot easier. But no, that's why the CFL isn't as sexy as the other leagues, because these guys sometimes get drafted and you don't see them for 2-3 years. Right? So even the best guys, they'll get drafted. You won't hear from them, right? Because there's that hierarchy, there's that ratio. There's only so many spots for Canadians to play. So I wish it was different. I don't know how it changes. I know your boy Rod Peterson wants the ratio gone, so that the best play. Maybe that's how you fix it. Maybe that's how you make the draft better. Maybe you have an American draft as well, and where you're drafting guys that are free agents. So guys, the people watching can kind of get more interested, because we know with American guys, they can come in and play right away. We see that so many times. So maybe that's how you've kind of fixed it. So maybe on the same draft night, you have an American draft and a Canadian draft, and go from there.
Ooh, I like the idea. The Argos pick is in at number 7 overall. The Toronto Argos select offensive lineman Peter Nicastro, University of Calgary. Bro, I got to pump my chest because I thought this guy was going to be picked in the first round, a little bit of a sleeper. You and I both know that we're going to go offensive line to protect Nick Arbuckle. I mean, if we ever get back on the field. But it makes a lot of sense. Nicastro was a guy that was a late riser, part of a Dinos offensive line that helped Adam Sinagra win a Heck Crichton 1 year and then win a Vanier Cup the next. So we're talking about a stud group there. And a lot of people felt like Logan Bandy and Michael before Peter Nicastro, a guy that maybe got a little more buzz, definitely I should say got more buzz in the draft process. But for you, when you see an offensive lineman picked by your team, pretend you're Toronto right now and you're still with them, how does that make you feel as a receiver?
Oh, I'm happy because, first of all, you didn't draft a guy at my position. If I'm a receiver, I'm like, okay, I don't got more competition to deal with. And secondly, you drafted someone that's going to help me catch passes, right? Especially in the CFL, you need depth at those lineman positions. Canadian offensive linemen, they play a vital role because they can come in and play right away in some cases and be very effective, right? So you help me do my job better. I'm extremely happy from Toronto. And we talked about it, playing process elimination. You got depth at defensive back. You got depth at linebacker. You got depth at receiver. The only place left that you're a bit weaker than those other positions is offensive lineman. And I'm glad they went with that pick right now, because that was the position they needed most help at. All
right, man, you've been hyped, Nate. We'll give you a little breather, like a series off kind of thing, right? Let the defense go on the field. Calgary's on the clock. We'll bring you back from Montreal at 10. And then I'm hoping you can stay with us again for the Argos at 12 and Edmonton at 14. And who knows, maybe a little longer, man.
I got you, man. Let's get it.
All right. All right, JC Abbott back with us, one of the lead draft analysts at 3downnation.com. JC, stamps on the clock here. We just had a University of Calgary offensive lineman come off the board who I really think they would have liked to get. But do you think there's another UFC Dino that the Stamps have their eye on, maybe with the initials LB?
I think there's a couple guys that they're potentially looking at, Dunk, who come from the University of Calgary. And one of them does have the initials LB. Logan Bandy is a player who I think can step in right on that offensive line. They're pretty set for their starting 3 on the interior, but beyond that, the depth is a little bit questionable. So Logan Bandy steps in there right away. He can help your team out. The other guy that I think might be an option here, although you might be able to scoop him up with your second-round pick, is Grant McDonald, the linebacker out of the University of Calgary. This is a team in the Stampeders that has traditionally started a Canadian linebacker. We all know about Alex Singleton excelling in the NFL. They've got Corey Greenwood still there right now. He's a guy with a lot of injury history. He's on the older side. And they also have Fraser Sopik, who's a guy I really love, who's an absolute standout. I think a potential future starter. If you select a kid like Grant McDonald, who's everything you want in a Canadian linebacker, he can slot in right away, help on special teams, and potentially take reps if one of those guys goes down.
Indeed. I just feel like, though, that offensive line for them is such a need with the retirements and, going through all the uncertainty with COVID-19 and protecting Bo Levi Mitchell. You're right. Grant McDonald could be a heck of a player, and they certainly know a lot about this Dinos team. And fortunately, they get to pick off of potentially a roster that last time they were on the field won the Vanier Cup in 2019. So we're talking about a highly talented group. And, we talked a lot about Grant McDonald. He's not going to go as high, but Charlie Moore, for me, is a guy that could be an absolute steal in this draft. I'd imagine he's going to go in the later rounds, but he was the leader of that defense in the middle. I'm not saying McDonald can't be a leader, but Charlie Moore was the guy that team rallied around. He put together a barbershop for them as they went on their playoff run. Just one of those glue guys that you love to have on your team. So I'm real curious to see, and there's always that debate in the CFL. Do you take the guy that's close to home because you know that he'll stay there for a while? And we've seen Sean McEwen just recently, and the Argos were just on the clock, leave the Argos, where he was a 3rd overall pick, and go back to Calgary. Now, John Hufnagel opened up his wallet to get him there, which doesn't happen very often. But we'll see if Calgary stays true to those hometown roots or goes off the board and takes, I shouldn't say off the board, but takes the best player available. Where do you think it could eventually land if you put yourself in the chair of Mr. Hufnagel?
I think the two guys we discussed are really the main options. You still have best available guys like Alonzo Adai, the safety from West Virginia, or even Mohamed Diallo, who's a very talented defensive tackle who could play at positions where you start Canadians, but you're not going to see them right now. The other guy that could slot in at linebacker is Amen Agbangbamiga at the University of Oklahoma State University, rather. He's signed by the LA Chargers, but he's a kid who grew up in Calgary, Congolese born, spent some time in Houston, but he's from Calgary, and he could, when he comes to the CFL, start immediately for you.
Well, my man, you're prophetic, because that's what's just happened. With the 8th overall pick in the 2021 CFL Draft, the Calgary Stampeders select linebacker Amen Agbangbamiga, Oklahoma State University, but calls Calgary home. As we well know, you made the point earlier, very smart one, that Corey Greenwood getting up there in age, Alex Singleton, a rising superstar, yeah, I said superstar, in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles. So they need an infusion of young talent at that position. The key here, though, he's under contract, as you mentioned, with the Los Angeles Chargers, got a $30,000 signing bonus, $15,000 up front, and he'll get $15,000 later. I should say $30,000 guaranteed. What do you think that means for his chances of potentially coming north of the border in the near future, or dare I say, if ever?
I think he's a guy that does make his way here eventually. Now, he might stick around for a little bit. Maybe he gets cut. Maybe he gets a practice roster spot. But I see him as a much better fit for the CFL game than the NFL game. And the reason why, he's a little bit of a smaller linebacker by NFL standards, about 6 foot, 230 pounds. But he doesn't have that elite athleticism that maybe you have from like a Devin White in the Super Bowl, where he's just flying around the field and can cover deep. He's not that guy. He's a more traditional linebacker. He can play sideline to sideline. He can bring you some juice as a blitzer, but he's not a guy who can do those other things that smaller linebackers can. And because he's a little bit smaller, sometimes he got rubbed out in the run game for Oklahoma State. He's not really a guy who can crash and bang between the tackles, which isn't something you need for the CFL game as much as you do for the NFL game. So I think he's more of a camp body for the Chargers. I really like his skill set, but unless he finds his role on special teams for them, I don't think he makes an immediate impact. And I think more likely than not, you're seeing him in a year or two.
Man, I love the terms. Crash and bang, gets rubbed out, a grinder. Like, this dude had a highly productive career at a Power 5 conference. And yes, some people might look at it and say, Well, he only got an undrafted free agent contract in the NFL. It's been since 1995 since a Canadian linebacker was drafted. So it's a big deal to even get a contract down there as a Canadian at that position. So to me, the Stampeders are looking at this situation and taking a calculated risk. It was much different a few years ago with Alex Singleton because they knew that Singleton was going to come right away. Now they'll have to be patient and see what happens with Ogbong Bamiga. It's almost a weird situation because you're wanting the kid to be as successful as possible, but you picked him. That said, we've seen in the past with the Calgary Stampeders a couple of, let's call them NFL picks that they've taken. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif was one, Tyler Varga was another. Neither of those players showed up. Now, different situations. Duvernay-Tardif was drafted. Tyler Varga was an undrafted free agent signing, but it shows you that when you get in that range with an NFL team where you're either picked or you're a UDFA, you sort of get used to that level of play and, more importantly, potentially, the level of pay. Now, part of the reason that Tyler Varga isn't playing football anymore is because he sustained a concussion in his rookie year with the Indianapolis Colts. He's the last Canadian running back to play in an NFL game. That was in 2015, and he retired after his rookie year. So that's one of the factors that weighs into it here is you can never predict the injuries. But I'm really intrigued about the potential of Ogbong Bamiga on both sides of the border. I'd like to see him be an impact guy with the Los Angeles Chargers, but what do you think the chances here are, JC? I'll put you on the hot seat of Ogbong Bamiga actually making it back across the border.
I think it's highly likely. Like I said, I don't see him as an impactful NFL guy. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of his skill set and his size. It's no knock on the guy. He's highly productive, and I think he will be an absolute standout in the CFL. That's not a knock on a player. He just doesn't have the traits for the NFL, which we know requires you to be in the top 1% of the top 1% of athletes in the world. He's a guy who's not quite that. He's just on the fringes and will excel in the CFL because of it.
Well, we have back-to-back linebackers that go because with the final pick in the first round of the 2021 CFL Draft, 9th overall, the Hamilton Tiger Cats select University of British Columbia linebacker Nick Cross, a versatile athlete who originally started his career at the University of Regina. Maybe a little bit higher than some people felt, but his talent, certainly if he reaches his potential, warrants a first-round selection.
Yeah, I'm shocked to see him go this high, but he's a player I absolutely love. For those of you watching at home, I'm a UBC guy. I'm actually on UBC campus right now. That's where my home is located. So a kid like Nick Cross, who played at UBC in 2019 and excelled, is a kid I'm happy to see selected. Now he's a coverage linebacker. He's a little bit undersized to play the linebacker position at the CFL level. He probably moves to safety, but he absolutely flies sideline to sideline. He's a great tackler in space. He slips under those blockers. From a talent perspective, extremely talented. Now, there are some other questions. He's suffered 2 very serious injuries, an Achilles and an ACL, just over the past year. That will draw away from his draft stock, or we thought it would draw away from his draft stock. Clearly, Hamilton is assured that he's going to be fully healthy and he hasn't lost a step. With modern surgeries, that tends to be the case where you can come back to full strength. But he also has some other concerns. He was a rookie of the year when he played at Regina, tested positive for cannabis, which is a banned substance at the youth sports level, and had that award stripped away from him, and then ended up transferring, spent a year playing for the Okanagan Sun. So there's some concerns on that end as well. Some teams maybe wondered how he would fit into a locker room, but a very, very talented player who's going to be fantastic on special teams.
All right, for the people that just joined us, let's recap the first round. With the first overall selection, the Ticats selected Boston College tight end Jake Burt, a Regina native. Second overall, the Riders took Nelson Lacombo, defensive back, University of Saskatchewan. Third overall, the Bombers select Liam Dobson, the big offensive lineman who was at Maine but transferred to Texas State. 4th overall, the BC Lions select Daniel Joseph, defensive lineman, North Carolina. 5th overall, the Edmonton football team takes Cole Nelson, defensive lineman, University of Alberta. 6th overall, the Ottawa Redblacks take Deshaun Stevens, a linebacker out of Maine, but people see him maybe as a potentially defensive end. He's still exploring potential transfer options as well in the NCAA with his last year of eligibility. 7th overall, offensive lineman Peter Nicastro from the University of Calgary is chosen by the Toronto Argos. 8th overall, linebacker Amen Agbogbamiga goes to the Stampeders out of Oklahoma State, a Calgary native, of course. And then to finish the round, 9th overall, the Ticats take Nick Cross, linebacker, UBC. Now we're into the second round. We have the Montreal Alouettes on the clock. And it's fitting because we have a current Montreal Alouette with us, JC. We'll let you get a little water break because you're laying the knowledge on us. Check up on your notes. We'll get right back to you and bring in the current Montreal Alouette, Natea J. He's back.
Bonjour.
You've been working on your French over the break.
Oh, man, working on it. You know, it's funny. When I signed with Montreal, I immediately thought, man, it's a grade 9 French where I was paying zero attention, still somehow managed to pass. And was wishing I paid attention so I could, talk to the people in Montreal. But I'm working on it. Maybe a little Rosetta Stone will help.
Yo, the real question, academic or applied?
Oh, I had to be academic. I was trying to go to the NCAA. So that was tough. And lucky I had a great teacher who liked me and, helped me out.
What was your final grade? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah. So I think I eked out a 71 or something like that. But I didn't do 71 worth of work. That was, by the grace of God on that one, honestly.
Well, man, you've been working on your French because you signed in free agency with the Montreal Alouettes, and they're, I'm going to say new because they haven't actually played, but general manager Danny Machocha, of course, Kahari Jones, the head coach. What was it like dealing with Machocha, of course, with his team on the clock right now?
Really cool, man. Really Machocha, straightforward guy. You know what I mean? So, and that's what you like as a GM, right? You don't like a guy that's just going to tell you what you want to hear. You want a guy that's going to tell you straight up what his plans are and what he plans to do. And that's something that you want as a player in your GM, somebody to be straight up and honest with you. So it's been cool dealing with the whole staff there. So far, the little bit I've got to talk to them, and I'm excited to if we do have a season, potentially suit up and see what Montreal has to offer.
So I'm curious, man, because I would imagine people out there are too. We had you on for the Argos picks earlier in Edmonton, 2 teams that you've played for. You haven't yet played for the Alouettes, but what made the difference in terms of you going from the Argos to the Alouettes during free agency?
What made the difference? At Montreal was probably the team that was the highest on me. In terms of wanting me and calling and checking up, and proximity is pretty. It's a drive to Toronto. I wasn't thinking about going out west again just because the family is in Toronto and all that. So that was the difference. And they've got pretty cool uniforms and great culture out there. That's a team that's been on the up and up since Vernon took over at quarterback. You've seen a steady rise, kind of like the rise when Masoli took over in Hamilton, right? That first kind of year they were getting their feet wet, right? And when he took over fully, you saw magic start to happen, and I see that same rise with Montreal. Did
Vernon Adams Jr. recruit you at all?
Dude, I had him on my podcast and, didn't know that I was even going to be a free agent or, change teams. And, he's such a cool guy, down to earth. You can tell why that team is doing well because it starts with him, just a down to earth guy, brings people together. You can tell, and just a cool guy. And he's got the talent to match it. Like, I don't know another quarterback in the CFL that, you put that footwork with the throwing ability, and Vernon Adams, he's got the total package right now, and really excited to see what this season brings if we have one.
And were you part of that crew that he brought out and spent $20K on to fly them out, or was that because you were in Canada that you couldn't go?
Yeah, it was because I was in Canada. I know he tried, but the guys in Canada couldn't go. It was only guys in the States that could attend that. And when I saw the $20K price tag, I'm like, woo! It would have been cool to be a part of that, but unfortunately, COVID has put a lot of plans to in the dirt. So unfortunately, I could be part of that. But hopefully, if we have a season, I can be part of that then.
What does that say about your franchise quarterback, who in a pandemic is willing to dole out money to keep the team camaraderie and obviously also prepare for a potential season?
It tells you he gets it. That's a guy that gets it. A guy that's willing to spend his own money, put his money where his mouth is. That's a guy that you want to follow. A guy that's gonna, is definitely a leader and a guy that is gonna go like places, because you see it all the time, especially in the NFL, where guys are getting together in the off season and it's a throw, especially new players and in a new system. And you want that, because in the CFL, training camps are short. There's not a lot of practice time. So the more practice you can get, especially with new players and a new quarterback, is going to make all the difference. And that's Vernon Adams. He's still a young quarterback in the league, but right now you can tell that he gets it and he understands how to bring a team together, how to be a leader, and how to be a leader of men, obviously. And CFL quarterbacks make good money, but it's not NFL money. And to make that kind of commitment, it shows me that guy wants to win more than anything.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. And you obviously studied that roster before you decided to sign there. Where do you think GM Danny Machocha could go here with their first pick, 10th overall in the 21 draft?
Man, they can go all over the place. I studied that roster. I know the reason why I came was because we were pretty thin at Canadian receivers, so I can see us going there. Lineman, Machocha loves linemen. I know he came from the University of Montreal, right? So he loves his Montreal-bred players. You know what? I don't know what position, but I'm going to say somebody has to be from the University of Montreal, because he loves, the University of Montreal players. My good friend Isaac tells me all the time that he played for him, that the love he has for those players is second to none.
He holds that Fleur de Lis close to his heart, and rightfully so. That's where he's from. So I think a couple of options that could be on the table for them here. If you want to go future and be risky, you can go Pierre-Olivier Lestage, who's an absolute dynamite offensive lineman from the University of Montreal. But he signed an undrafted free agent contract with the Seattle Seahawks and had Pete Carroll call him to help seal the deal in the free agent process. So that might be a guy maybe that's a little further down the board, because you look at the Seahawks roster, they really need an offensive lineman. But when you're that hometown guy and you're from there and you can put it in the pipeline, like Marc-Antoine Dequoy, which happened a year ago, even though he got signed by the Packers, the Alouettes still took him, and he got released by Green Bay. Unfortunately, probably didn't get the normal chance that you would get, because they cut down the preseason games and training camp and all that stuff last year due to COVID-19. And look, man, the pick's in. Number 10 overall, the Montreal Alouettes select offensive lineman Pierre-Olivier Lestage, the future. You called it. He likes his Frenchmen. He likes his big men. How does that make you feel as a receiver who's part of the Alouettes, that they go out and get a lineman, but you might not see him in the near future, maybe even if ever?
Yeah, no, that makes me feel great. And, it kind of feels good that, you like I said, Machocha, he's a kind of guy that's, straight up, straightforward. You know what he likes, and he goes out and get what he likes. But like we were talking about earlier, he might have a chance to stick in Seattle, because thin on that line. You saw this offseason, Russ goes in the media and kind of calls out his line. You never really see Russ saying anything, but he came out this offseason and said, he could use some help on that O-line. So that tells me they needed help. They really needed help on the O-line. They went out and signed him as an undrafted free agent. He's got a good chance, because the guys that they have right now weren't cutting it enough for Russ to not throw them under the bus. So I'm happy and sad, because we probably won't see him. But if we do, unbelievable talent.
All right, man. I got to get JC back in here, because he loves Pierre-Olivier Lestage. But we'll be back with you right in a minute. JC, your boy just goes off the board at number 10 overall to the Alouettes. Some people affectionately call him PO. Others call him Pole, short for Pierre-Olivier Lestage, of course. What are your thoughts on the Owls taking him at 10?
It's a risky pick, Dunk. I said earlier on the broadcast, I think he is a guy that sticks at least for a time with the Seahawks, because it's a position of need, which they didn't have very many draft picks in this year. That said, if he ever comes north, and Danny Machocha might be as plugged into any of this as anyone as his college coach, this is a slam dunk selection. He's an absolute potential star on the offensive line. He moves so well. It's like butter. It's beautiful. It's like going to church watching Pierre-Olivier Lestage play offensive line. He goes out, he pulls in that Vanier Cup game against the Calgary Dinos. I think he was on the move in like 80% of plays and making blocks out in space like a fullback or a tight end. There's one play that stands out to me, Dunk. I tweeted it out earlier, so check that out on Twitter, guys. There's a play in which he pulls out into space. He finds the linebacker in space. He grabs him. He latches on, and he drives him through his team's sideline and pins him, physically pins him against the wall on the side of the stadium. Like literally picks him up and pins him against the wall. It looks like something out of The Blind Side. This kid is special.
He is a special dude, man. And I talked about it a little bit with Nate, and I'm curious to get your take on it because you're rolling the dice a little bit. Yes, we know Dana Machocha loves his Frenchmen. Yes, we know he loves the players that he also coached and recruited at the University of Montreal. But the Seattle Seahawks seem to have quite an affinity for Pierre-Olivier Lestage. They were the most interested in him through the entire process. And it was really the team that Lestage was hoping offered a contract at the end of the NFL draft. Oftentimes people make a big deal about getting drafted, especially if it's in the late rounds. But to be quite honest, we've seen a number of times in recent memory with Canadians going down there that when they've been able to select from multiple suitors as an undrafted free agent, it's really paid dividends for them. Anthony Auclair would be one who just won a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and signed with the Houston Texans. He got to select where he was going to go. Carter O'Donnell, University of Alberta offensive lineman, same deal with the Indianapolis Colts. They came after him hard, and he's still on that roster. So the fact that Seattle wanted Pierre-Olivier Lestage, I should say, so badly makes me think that it is a little bit risky, although Montreal's likely sitting there thinking, well, we did a similar thing with Marc-Antoine Dequoy a year ago, and he is free, and if he's not already under contract, he's going to be under contract with the Alouettes. So where do you put this on the risk level?
I think it's very risky. It's not a choice I would have made personally. I think if you're going to grade out picks, which I don't really like doing, I don't know what Hodge will have on his written report, but I'd put it at C+, B-, simply because of how risky it is. Because I as I said, I think he sticks in Seattle just based on pure numbers. And he has the Paul Alexander stamp of approval, which for the uninitiated, Paul Alexander is one of the greatest offensive line coaches of all time. He's the leading mind in the offensive line industry, if you will. Coached for the Bengals for a number of years. He's the guy who produced people like Andrew Whitworth, who's playing with the Los Angeles Rams now, multiple Pro Bowlers, really one of the best coaches there is. And he saw Pierre-Olivier Lestage and said, I want you. I'm going to train you. And he took him under his wing. He's been working with him. That's how he got that NFL contract without playing at all last year because the U Sports season was canceled. And he put all his tender, loving care as a coach into Pierre-Olivier Lestage, and it's going to pay dividends.
I would imagine it would as well. Just so people know, the Calgary Stampeders currently on the clock at 11th overall. Their first pick in the second round, their second pick overall in the draft. But I want to stay on Pierre-Olivier Lestage for a second because I know you really like him, JC. But we've seen how important it is to have offensive linemen on your roster right now. And it was a little surprising because the Alouettes could have taken a player like, let's say, Bryce Bell, who would have been in camp right away because they lost Trey Rutherford to retirement. And we see right now the pick is in for the Stamps, number 11 overall. Calgary selects Bryce Bell, offensive lineman Wilfrid Laurier. So they go get a now offensive lineman to help that group. And the Alouettes pass up that opportunity for a risky pick. So how do you weigh that when you're on the clock and you're looking at your roster and you want to take the best player, but you're also looking at a situation where you could use some help, because I think there's an argument there that Montreal could have used Bryce Bell, but he slips one pick and the Stamps were probably pretty happy to get him.
Yeah, when it comes to the Alouettes roster, I think they've got a little bit of depth on offensive line. So there's some guys that haven't really blossomed yet that are in the pipeline, if you will. Someone like a Zach Wilkinson, who was drafted highly 2 years ago. It was now a kid I played community football with out here in BC. Very talented player who can step into a role if you need him to. They signed David Foucault, obviously another former Carabin who spent time in the NFL. Sean Jameson, Christian Mate, Jason Lauzon-Seguin, who's a guy who can start at tackle. So they have some talent there. After that, it drops off a little bit, but besides maybe Andrew Becker, who's a kid I loved last year out of the University of Regina. But it wasn't as big a need as I think some people may have anticipated. I still would have gone with the now player if I were them, but I don't think it's necessarily the worst decision to take a guy with so much upside if he ever comes north in Pierre-Olivier-Lestage, especially in a draft like this with so many futures options.
All right, we got the Argos on the clock, so we're going to bring in our Argos expert because he grew up watching that team, knows them so well. JC, we'll get back to here real quick, my man. Yeah, it's so hyped, Matei, to have you with us on the show, man. Argos back on the clock. What are you feeling here for Toronto? Their first pick, they went offensive line, Peter Nicastro, University of Calgary, get a guy that's going to be in camp right away. You mentioned how there's not too many other needs on that roster. You know it very well. Where do you think they could go?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we got you now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was saying I think the Argos could go back to the well, with this pick because, like we talked about, the other positions stacked up, receiver, there's no point. I mean, there's only so many spots. Like, why would you go back there? DB, they got a good collection of guys, especially at DB. They signed Arden, they got Boateng, they got Robbie Woodson there as well. So, linebacker Enoch, Jack Sarr they drafted last year. A lot of good depth. A Short Hill signed from Hamilton last year. A lot of good depth, at those positions. So why not go back to at lineman? Because we know in the CFL, you could have an all Canadian line, right? So great. It's not a bad thing to build up a good amount of depth there. I can see them doing that, especially with this draft being, there was no season last year, so you can kind of stack up at positions you really need.
I'm curious, and you mentioned that receiver, they don't really need it, but Terrell Jana on the board, played with Dejan Brissett at the University of Virginia. Could they reunite those two?
Yeah, you could, right? But, you think about what is best for your team. Okay, so if you're the Argos, you sign a lot of American receivers. You're probably, in start one a receiver to start the season, right? It's probably going to be Bresson, right? Then you got you waiting to see how the season plays out, but you got Dejan waiting in the wings. You got Noel, who's experienced, right? So it's like, where would Jana stand in that in the hierarchy, right? He may have a whole season and not play, but maybe you get a lineman here, or maybe even a linebacker. But I just don't think Canadian receivers a spot of this high that you would spend some capital on. What do you think?
Yeah, you mentioned linebacker being a possibility. Ben Hladek, a guy that, although he's based in the West Coast, is a guy that I think can come in and contribute right away. There were some questions, and really overall, about his numbers in the virtual pro day. And I don't know if you heard that behind the scenes with some of the players, but some scouts are questioning, like, hey, these guys are running super fast times, but who they got timing them, right?
Yeah. Dude, I wish I was coming out during this virtual pro day era, because I'm seeing guys that these times are like unbelievable. I'm like, dreaming of running some of these times. I'm like, okay, there's no way everybody's running a 4.3. Are you kidding me? Like when I was coming out, there was like one guy, maybe a whole draft running a 4.3. Now we got over 10. We got linemen running 4.3s. So I'm like, some fishy's going on. Who's timing this? You got your father-in-law timing you or what? So yeah, I don't put a lot of stock in a lot of these 40 times. I think a lot of these scouts don't either. They're going by film, right? Especially in this year. And, it's a tough year because some of these guys don't have a ton of film because they didn't play last year, right? And it's college. And if you're an underclassman, chances are you're probably not playing. So you just have to go where you can, talk with coaches and a lot of projections. And this draft is where you'll see the great scouting staff really shine. Like who's out here, driving to Waterloo to talk to the assistant strength coach, to see who's, putting in work on these teams, right? So you'll see that some of these scouts really shine when the dust settles.
And the Argos pick is in at 12 overall in the 2021 CFL Draft. Toronto selects offensive lineman Sage Dockstader, New Mexico State, a big fella, man. And it does seem like they're sort of going with what you said, Nate, right? They're bulking up that offensive line.
Yeah, man, huge need, right? When you think about the team and you think about all the last offseason, all the guys they signed that were local and skill positions, and you think about it, the one spot that they were kind of lacking a little bit. Not the guys that are in there, great players. The depth was lacking a little bit, and I love to see them adjust that as a fan of the CFL, and you love to see teams adjust areas of weakness. They found out as a weakness, and they're attacking it head on right now. So that's unbelievable, that job that they're doing right now.
The Argos have 2 linemen with their 2 picks so far, one in the first, one in the second round. Ottawa Redblacks on the clock. And Nate, you're a receiver. You've been in the league for a long time. What was it feeling like, though, when you sat there and you got picked in the 3rd round? Did you think you might go earlier? And I'm asking you that question because a lot of people felt like Terrell Janet was going to be a surefire first-round pick. He's still out there on the board. There was people talking about him being locked into the Ticats, going 1st overall. That hasn't happened. So when you were there on draft day, what are those emotions that you go through? Because as a competitor and a player, you're thinking, hey, why am I not going in the 1st round or 1st overall? I would imagine.
Yeah. So, the thing for Jenner right now is probably he's going through his head. He probably believes that he's the best receiver in this draft, right? And, the saving grace for him, there haven't been any receivers taken. Because if there's been a receiver taken, that means there was a team out there that believed another receiver was better than him. And right now that hasn't happened. So he'll know, he'll just chalk it up to the type of draft it is. Okay, these teams have needs at other positions, and that's what they're attacking. So I think he's probably in a good place. For me on draft day, I didn't play a lot my junior year, right? And I was a junior. It was the last time the CFL draft had that where, you could be drafted as a NCAA junior. So I didn't have big expectations going. I knew if I got drafted, it wasn't a particularly strong receiver draft. So I knew I had a good chance to go one of the few receivers taken. So didn't have a lot of expectations. I just want to go somewhere close to home.
Man, before we get to these other picks, the Red Blacks, and we'll stay with you for the Edmonton pick. We got an old lineman watching us at home, and I got to maybe recount something a little bit here. Philip, I don't think you're necessarily that old. The Argos have gone back-to-back picks. I think they're just helping out at that Canadian offensive line position for the future. But I'm sure Blake's probably still got a lot of years left, right?
Yeah, Phil hit us up in the comments, man, and shout out Phil Blake. He hit up in the comments when I think you said they're older at that position. A couple of guys older. You're not old, buddy, but these guys, they drafted linemen to give you a spell in camp, man. Older legs. You're not old, but older legs. You need a day off here and there. You guys are going to take all those reps so you're fresh for game day. They need you for game day, so that's what they're waiting for. They just want to take these guys and get you off your legs a little bit.
Man, that's a proper veteran view of training camp. I dig it.
Got to, man. Yeah, you play a lot of time. There's little tips and tricks that you pick up.
Oh, and these young kids are going to learn those real quick. At 13 overall, the Ottawa Redblacks have selected defensive back Alonzo Adai, West Virginia, an absolute baller, man. As a receiver, have you seen this cat on tape, and what do you think, Nate?
I've seen him live on tape. dude, the dude is active. I've seen him play safety. I've seen him play nickel, and that's going to bode well for the CFL because that dude's a ball hawk. I've seen him light dudes on special teams on kickoff return. He's a guy that is destined to be a starter, almost like an Antoine Pruneau right away, where you see the level of competition. He's playing in the Big 12, right? He's seen there's no receiver in the CFL that he's going to be surprised by. He just has to learn the schemes. He has to learn the waggle, all the little things. Athletically, he's probably as good as you can be going into the season right now. I remember it when Antoine Pruneau got drafted, and the things that they were saying about him: fast, right? Mature, ball hawk. I see a lot of similarities with him. And watching him, especially being his first year, I know he transferred in to West Virginia, being his first year and simulating right away. That bodes well for his prospects in the CFL because he's shown that he's able to, join a team and make an immediate impact. Right. I even saw an interview where the coaches were praising him, his teammates were praising him, guys are looking up to him. Fantastic pick because not only is he a baller on the field, you can tell that off the field he's got the right traits to succeed and have a long career as a professional.
And how risky is it though if that happens in the NFL? Because he's seemingly going to go back and play that other year. And you had a similar scenario where you said you were drafted as a junior. Now, obviously, it's the COVID-19, let's call it gray shirt or COVID-19 medical shirt year that he's going to get. But is that risky because he played so well in his first year in the Big 12, coming from New Hampshire, and then has boosted his stock up to the point where maybe he gets picked in the NFL draft? Is he that good? Yeah,
watching him, he was one of their better players on their defense, West Virginia's defense, right? So I'm thinking the whole time, man, like I know he's a CFL, he's on their radar, but this guy is going to have a legitimate shot to make the NFL, and especially him coming back another year. That's just another year where he's seen all these offenses. He's going to understand what to do. He's going to look a lot better this season if he stays healthy, right? So it's going to only boost his NFL stock. I know he had the opportunity to declare for the NFL draft this year. He chose to come back, and smart move on his part because he's only going to be better. He's only going to be seen in a high regard, and that's definitely going to be improve his NFL stock. It's definitely a risky move, but when you make these picks as GMs in the CFL, you're kind of betting against a guy to make a team, right? You're kind of betting against the guys to make NFL rosters. So sometimes that bet pays off. I mean, in Edmonton, you saw Tavon Smith was picked by the Edmonton football team. 3 years goes by, they think they're never getting him. Things go a little bit sideways in the NFL. He's back and making plays in the CFL, right? So sometimes these chances that you take don't pay off immediately, but at a certain point, you might get lucky like Edmonton did with Tavon.
And you mentioned Edmonton. They're currently on the clock with the 14th overall pick. We're in the second round of the 2021 CFL Draft. And, man, I just can't understand how Tavon Smith didn't have a longer career in the NFL. And I'm not talking about him, but whenever he got an opportunity with the Colts, that dude made plays. To me, it just ends up being a little bit about who were you with at the time, or who do you know, or maybe who did you get coached by at the NCAA level that goes to the NFL, because that dude's an absolute burner, a playmaker, and every time he was on the field, he caught the football. So I'm like, what else do you want this guy to do to get an opportunity? Obviously, it benefited the Edmonton football team, but do you feel like he got a raw deal?
Man, like you said, he made plays every time he won the game. And Tavon's a very good friend of mine. And we talk, I mean, when he was in college, we talk all the time. And when he made it to the league, we talk all the time, especially after games. And he was doing his thing, especially in practice. He was showing everything he needed to show. That just the injury bug caught up to him a little bit, right? He would be going well, have a good game in practice, tweak something, maybe miss another practice. And, in the NFL, they don't play around. They don't wait for you, right? They got another guy ready to come in your spot. So with Tavon, it was a talent issue. It just got up with the NFL culture. Being an undrafted guy, they always have a draft pick waiting in the wings, especially there when he was in Indianapolis. They had a few guys that were drafted, fairly high that they were waiting on that kind of didn't pan out. But whenever Tavon had maybe had to sit out practice, there's another guy waiting in the wings, and that's sometimes what happens, with guys. And you could tell he got a few other opportunities with I remember Oakland and Jacksonville, and that shows that he's got the talent to be in the NFL. We all know, we can see who has talent. Tavon is one of those guys that has talent to be in the NFL. But there's also a lot of guys in the CFL that have the talent to be in the NFL for whatever reason, whether it's injuries or things off the field, they're not there, right? The NFL is a very exclusive league. A lot of guys are talented enough to be in that league, but it comes down to right place, right time, and being healthy.
You said it, man. I feel like people look at the salaries of a CFL player sometimes and feel like that means there's a talent disparity, which is not the case. And I'll flat out say it. You're still a player in the league, so I can. But that's on the business side, right? They need to grow the CFL bigger and brand it much better. Like I was saying the other day on a podcast that I was on, Tyreek Hill and Brandon Banks are very similar speeds. Now, some people got after me on Twitter and debated it and said, well, Tyreek ran 14.9. But yeah, exactly. You've seen these dudes. Like, I just feel like we need to poster that, especially all over Toronto, to let people know that these dudes up here are fast, they're athletic. You're one of them. So do you feel like the branding needs to be better?
Oh, it needs to be 180, a complete 180, because I've seen the guys in the CFL locker rooms, like a Darius Bowman, right? A Duke Williams, Brandon Zylstra's, right? Those guys that you see, some of those guys are in the NFL now, but they were in the CFL at one point, and one point they were afterthoughts, right? So honestly, it needs to be flipped on its head. Honestly, when I retire one day, I'm going to find a way to, have something with the CFL where we can show off the talent of this league, because these guys are unbelievable. Maybe have a 40-yard dash with the fastest guy in the NFL and the fastest guy in the NFL, and then let the fans watch and you decide, okay, this is the guy you think is way better. Okay, he's getting dusted by Brandon Banks, right? So we need to do something. We need to do some cross-branding where people can really see the talent of these CFL players. And I think I'm brainstorming right now, man. I'm going to figure something out, because it's really important that people know CFL players are really, really special.
And more of that talent currently coming into the league. Edmonton has made their selection at number 14 overall. Linebacker Grant McDonald, University of Calgary, was once, way back in the day when he started his post-secondary career, a tight end at Maine. So a guy that's been on both sides of the ball, really settled in as a linebacker. Have you seen this dude play, Nate?
I have not seen Grant McDonald play, but I can tell you one thing. You're always scared of guys that on the defensive side that played offense before, because they can kind of think one step ahead. So that's a great pick by Edmonton, because a guy like Grant McDonald, playing tight end, being in the offensive meeting room, how offensive players and how offensive coaches think. And as a linebacker, you can almost dissect things ahead of time. So that's gonna bode well for him in his prospects in the CFL. And being a linebacker, he's got a great chance to make this team, because he's going to be asked to do things on special teams right away. He looks like a fantastic prospect already. So I'm excited about that pick for them. But when you get a guy that played both ways, that's the kind of guy that is going to be able to play a long time, because they understand how the game works.
All right, man. Well, Nate, we really appreciate you giving us some time. We're going to have a few more picks here. We got JC on the West Coast for Bay C. John Hodge is going to check in for Winnipeg at 16. Rod Peterson at 17. And then I'll hold it down for the Ticats at 18. And then after that, bro, they're going to come fast and furious. So we appreciate it, man. And always offering that unique insight, bro. I can't wait. Hopefully we see some football being played and you get back on the field this year. And let the people know, is the All Ball podcast still going on?
All Ball podcast is still going on. It's going to be back when we get some NFL action. We got some great guests, planned. Right now we have a little off season, right? So we got some great guests planned up, some fun guests coming up, and I can't wait until we get some football action back. But all the guests are going to be planned for the fall. They're lined up, they're ready to go. Some NFL players, some big time NFL players, Major League Baseball players, NHL players, all coming down on the All Ball podcast. Look out for it this fall.
All right, man, we will. Thanks, Atay. Appreciate you.
Peace. Thanks for having me on.
All right, he's back, the man on the West Coast for the long haul. BC Lions on the clock at 15 overall. JC, where do you think they could go considering what they did with their first pick, taking Daniel Joseph, defensive end, North Carolina State?
Well, somewhat ironically, Dunk, the two players we talked about before that first pick are still on the board. Two guys that John Hodge had in his first round mock draft. You've got Terrell Jana, we've all talked about him as the top receiver available, a local kid, very productive for the University of Virginia, and Ben Halatic, another local kid from Vernon, BC, who played just across the road from me here at the University of British Columbia, and can do some unique things there. So the two players that we've already discussed are still here. I'd be shocked if one of them isn't taken.
Well, we got these two local kids, and our colleague John Hodge just tweeted he would think that Ben Halatic here would be a steal. I feel like people would say the same for Terrell Jana, both hometown kids. We had the defensive pick for Rick Campbell, the head coach, co-general manager, who's a defensive guru, has a defensive background in the CFL, with their first round selection. You curious if they're doubled down here on defense or if they go Jana? It seems like it's down to those two players, but we've had multiple surprises already in this draft so far. So if you're in the chair, where are you going here and why?
I'm personally going Jana. I thought he was a slam dunk for the first overall pick. So that's who I'm taking. It's simply too good for me to pass up. The other thing I think the BC Lions might consider is they need some depth on the offensive line. I think they're comfortable with their three starters in Hunter Stewart, Suk Chung, and Peter Godber in the middle. But it lacks behind them. You've got Andrew Pearson and David Neville and Matt Gouvrement from the last draft class, and none of them are really proven commodities. And with Godber, he's a guy you took third overall. I thought he was the best lineman that year available in the CFL draft, but he struggled so much with injuries, you don't know if he's going to be on the field. So maybe you take someone at that offensive line position that might help you right now.
And that's indeed what they've done, although it's a futures pick at 15 overall in the second round. The BC Lions select Alaric Jackson, offensive lineman out of Iowa, a guy who just recently signed an undrafted free agent contract with the Los Angeles Rams to potentially at least compete for a spot to protect franchise quarterback Matthew Stafford, who was involved in that big offseason trade as Jared Goff went the other way to Detroit, plus a bunch of picks. Jackson gets signed there, apparently got a decent amount of a signing bonus, but there were some questions about Jackson, even though he was a 4-year starter at the offensive line factory known as Iowa, with Kirk Ferentz there, their head coach, who's been there forever, and starting across from Tristan Wirfs. So what are some of those question marks that have come up that led to Jackson going undrafted in the NFL?
Well, when I look at him, I see a couple of problems. First of all, he's really inconsistent. Sometimes he's sloppy. I would even call him lazy at times, which is not what you want to see. Sometimes he's inconsistent, maybe doesn't have the speed that the NFL looks for to take on those edge rushers as a tackle. Most NFL scouts saw him as a guard, and he really pops in the run game at times. He shoots those hips through. He knocks guys off the ball. But again, it's inconsistent. When he has to go up to the second level, he gets a little bit soft. He gets a little bit lazy. So you've got those concerns about how badly does he really want it. And that comes into play in the CFL when the CFL's taking him here. And that's part of the reason why he falls along with the NFL contract. The thing I like to say, when you've got a guy like Pierre-Olivier Lestage, for example, coming out of a school like Montreal, getting a UDFA contract, that's an indication the NFL loves them, right? They're in love with that player from that small school. When you've got a 4-year starter at Iowa who drops as a UDFA, I mean, 2 years ago, we were talking about Alaric Jackson as a potential second or even first round pick, and he drops to a UDFA. That's an indication that the NFL really doesn't like that player.
Indeed. So we got a little bit of insight on Jackson, the pick for BC. We have our Bombers expert, Mr. John Hodge, who's taking a little break from all that keyboard typing. So JC, hang tight. We're going to get to Mr. Hodge here and talk a little bit of Bombers because they are on the clock. Hodge, are your hands holding up? Are your fingers keeping up?
Is this okay?
Case of the shakes?
They've been doing it for the last 30 minutes.
We'll give you a break
I'm
when
just
it's
kidding.
all over. The
No.
Bombers on the clock at 16 overall. We saw what they did in the first round. Little bit of maybe a surprise pick going with Liam Dobson, the big-bellied offensive lineman out of Maine who's now at Texas State. What options are on the board that you think fit Winnipeg with this pick?
Well, there's a couple guys who jump out right away. There's Terrell Jana, who got the kiss of death of being number one in my mock draft, which of course means he's still on the board this late. I also think Ben Halatic, I'm surprised to see him on the board still. Fantastic linebacker and potential defensive end out of UBC. I still think this team could take a future. I think, you've got a guy like Patrice Rene, you got a guy like Dean Leonard on the board, both NCAA defensive backs. So for the Bombers, I think it's pretty wide open, to be honest. They went future early. They took the first future of this draft at number 3 with Liam Dobson. So I would not be at all surprised to see them take a future again, if the now guys, so to speak, on the board aren't potential fits for them.
Yeah, it's going to be intriguing to see. We've already had some surprises in this draft, and you mentioned it. Terrell Jana has seemingly, in our mind, fallen. Is that a way that they could go just based on the perceived value?
Well, this is a team that lost Daniel Peterman to free agency. They start Nick Dembski. They start Drew Olatarski, but there's not a lot of existing depth behind them. Peterman was seen in the Bombers clubhouse as a starting caliber receiver. He just didn't happen to be starting for them because they had 2 veterans ahead of him. So if you're the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, you lose a starting caliber receiver who was always impactful when he got on the field. He's now in Ottawa. I think Janet is a fit. I'm not sure it's the pick, but I think he is a great fit if they want to go that route.
All right, you've been giving analysis in written form on all of the picks, Hodge. Where can people find it? And what kind of info is there for people wondering, hey, my guy just drafted this player that I've never maybe heard of before? What kind of info can they find?
Well, I'm grading all the picks. There's write-ups on each player that give the background, where they played in school, what's going on with each individual guy, what they're good at, what they're maybe not as good at, who they are, what they're about. That's what I like to do, is break down these prospects. I spent a lot of time through the year watching film, writing these comments that I provide. And then the grade, of course. Is it a good selection? Is it not a good selection? Who is who is this guy? Why is he a good fit? A guy who would be an A+ selection in the 5th round is probably a C+ selection in the 3rd and an F in the 1st round. So I like to grade the picks and decide, kind of give a bit of a breakdown as to how good of a pick I think it is, how good of value I think each player, honestly, each player is worth at their respective spot.
I'm curious how you're going to grade the Bombers pick, because it is in at 16 overall. Winnipeg has chosen defensive back / linebacker Retta Cramdy out of the University of Montreal, a player who we thought Danny Machocha could take with the Owls pick at number 10 overall, their first selection, because he coached Retta Cramdy. He took another player, Pierre-Olivier Lestage, that he's coached. But are you surprised that Cramdy has gone so high?
I think it's a little bit high for Cramdy, but I also get it if you're the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. By the time you make your next selection, he's gone to Montreal because, as you mentioned, Danny Machocha coached him at the University of Montreal. He was one, I think, of Machocha's favorite Carabins, called him a student of the game, said Cramdy was a guy who would insist in practice on going up against the Carabins' top receiver in one-on-ones, a guy who's only about 5'10", about $190, but plays a lot bigger than that. It's going to be a bulldog on special teams, and this is definitely a positional fit for Winnipeg. This is a team, they did draft Noah Hallett, and they've got Nick Hallett as well from the 2019 CFL draft. But right now, the Hallett brothers are the only defensive backs on the roster. They started Jeff Heck there in 2019 at safety. He's not back. And they lost Kerfala Exame, another one of those Carabins in free agency, to Danny Machocha. So the Bombers scoop Cramdy here, get him before Montreal has a chance to take him. So I get it. They went future in the first. Cramdy's not a future. He's a right now guy. And there's only one position I really think the Bombers needed help, and that's DB. Again, I do think it's a little bit early for Cramdy, but I get it from the Bombers' perspective.
All right, you talked about it off the top when we slid you back in here in the second round. Terrell Jana is still on the board. How surprising is it, and what fits do we see here? Because literally, with the next picks, we got Riders, Ticats, Riders. So does he come off the board here in this sequence, especially with the Ticats having 2 selections?
I would be shocked if he doesn't come off the board here to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I think Jana is a guy they had up very high on their list. I don't think they were expecting him to be available at 2, but obviously if you got a chance to take a local talent like Nelson Lacombo out of the University of Saskatchewan, you do it. I don't think in their wildest dreams they thought he would be available here at 17. However, there's Husky and Connor Bergloff is still on the board, a great safety, first-team All-Canadian, who I have here in my mock draft to Saskatchewan. So it's going to, I think, be a little bit of a battle. That said, Logan Vandy's on board. So if you're Saskatchewan, maybe you say, okay, we think Bergloff is going to slide past the Ticats at the end of 2, top of 3. Maybe we get Bergloff in 3. Maybe we get Jana now. I'll tell you what, right now, if that happens, the Riders are getting A for both picks.
Just to correct you there for a second, Bergloff, an offensive lineman. You mentioned he was a safety. I just want people to know it there. He's an O lineman, but
center.
You're a Bombers
Center
insider.
is what I meant to say.
Center. We got it. Offensive lineman from our Bombers expert. We're going to go from Mr. John Hodge to Rod Peterson, who has just checked in. Hodge, we'll let you get back to it on the computer side. Maybe we'll see on the stream a little later.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, we welcome Rod Peterson back into the fold. Again, the Riders on the clock, Mr. Peterson. You called Nelson Lacombo the first time. What do you got in store for us now?
No, I don't have anything here now. I can't see them taking Jana. I mean, you're seeing why guys don't want to do mock drafts.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I don't do them anymore.
I know. And it's got nothing to do. Obviously, there's few guys more plugged in than the guys that have done them, including John Hodge. A couple years ago, I asked Craig Smith to do one for me, and he's like, no, not a chance. And, you know, Craig Smith is our director of scouting with the Rod Peterson Show, 19 years in the CFL. He's been around these draft tables. I apologize that my eye is up. Oh, my God. Terrell Jana. They took
and
him.
He goes. John Hodge just predicted it.
There you go, Johnny. Like Dumb and Dumber. You've totally redeemed yourself. So Terrell Jana is the Saskatchewan Roughrider. And here's a guy that is first-round talent. I'll bet you right now the Roughrider people are around their table high-fiving each other that they got him with the 17th overall pick in this draft near the end of the second round because John had him number 1 overall. I saw your quotes from the Ticats scouts saying that this guy was ready to play. So, you know, there's still a lot of picks left. It's going to be a long night. But for the Roughriders, you got to think. You got the guy you wanted with your first pick and a steal with your second pick. This is going pretty good.
How do you feel Jana might fit in there? Because you mentioned when we had John earlier, Roddy, that Braden Lenius is ready to play a big-bodied receiver. They have Justin McInnes, who seemed like he was just kind of scratching the surface at the end of last season. And Jana can fit in there, maybe developing. Maybe we get back to those days, dare I say, of the Canadian Air Force if Jana can live up to the potential.
Well, ideally, they would love that. They would absolutely love that. But I can't tell you what the other needs are as well as I can tell you what the Roughriders' needs were. And that's why I thought Lacombo was a slam dunk. I still don't think they necessarily needed Canadian receiver, but they're in the territory now where they're like, listen, this is the best guy available. You know, I got a pretty good idea how Jeremy O'Day thinks. He likes to go local. He likes to fill a need. But if you're sitting there at 17 with a potential number 1 overall pick, you're taking him. So I probably shouldn't have said that they weren't going to. That was just a guess on my behalf. I thought that Lacombo was a pretty good choice. But, I mean, Jake Burt would have been a fit, too, as a Regina guy. But if they obviously – he wasn't available for them at number 2, but here they got Terrell Jana. And where they go from here, like I would not be shocked if Kyle Borsa hears his name called in the next round by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Like Justin, have you been following the coverage out of Regina? Like their family's having a draft party tonight, socially distanced in the garage. Like if there's a God, if there's a green God, and I've always said if there's a God, he's a Rider fan. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are taking Kyle Borsa, not necessarily with their next pick, but before the night is over. I didn't actually think that he would necessarily go. You know that his suspension history, he wasn't in the top 20 selections, and a lot of those top 20 on the Central Scouting Bureau rankings are still available. let's not forget that. The high names haven't gone yet, Justin, for the most part. At what point do they start going?
You would imagine it's going to be fairly soon here. And Roddy, if you will, we have the Ticats with back-to-back picks and then the Riders to start the third round. So are you down to stay with us through that Riders third round pick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it, man. I got Hamilton covered, you know. I'm a sports anchor at CHCH. That's my background there. And we'll cover the Riders when they get to that third round. But as you mentioned with Borsa, very intriguing talent. But I feel like sometimes the pre-draft hype can get overblown. We've seen that happen with Terrell Jana and him coming down the board. But with Borsa, he's an interesting case because, yes, he had the drug suspension that kept him off the field. But the last time that he played for the Regina Rams, and you saw him live there many times, Roddy, a dynamic guy, an athlete that has rare speed, not only for a Canadian, but for any player coming into the CFL. So do you actually see him being a fit with Saskatchewan? I'm not necessarily saying at 3 overall, but are they looking to put a running back there and develop a Canadian runner?
Well, honestly, I don't know why they wouldn't, but I had a really long chat with Kyle on the weekend, and forgive me if I called him Corey because that's his dad, and he played for the Rams when I called Rams games a long time ago. So that is a Saskatchewan football family right there, the Borsa family. And Kyle admitted nobody played in 2020. He was suspended in 2019. And even in 2018, he split time reps with Atlee Simon. He was never the featured back with the Regina Rams. And that's why never in his career. And that's why I kind of went into this draft thinking I could see him not being drafted. A la Emil Hughes, who was a record-setting running back with the Regina Rams. A la a Rob Bagg. I don't need to tell our Eastern Canadian viewers what he did at Queens. He wasn't drafted. And both those guys had Hall of Fame careers in the Canadian Football League. So it wouldn't have shocked me if Kyle hadn't, because he's barely played. He does have the drug suspension, PED, which, by the way, I'm sure you saw this story. You were on the conference call with him. It was a situation where he didn't know what he was putting in his body, and he apologized for that. Did get his suspension shortened after appealing. So, I mean, the intentions are all there. He's a local guy, and I just think there's a lot of places that you could use a guy like Kyle Borsa. If not in your offense, then definitely on special teams. He's that kind of guy. There's a ton of them in the Canadian Football League. Now, he's not the only the Riders aren't the only team, though, that could be looking at a Kyle Borsa, too. Like, I don't know where it came out today, Justin, but somebody had said they'd heard that Edmonton was going to take Chuba Hubbard with the number 5 pick. It really wouldn't have shocked me if they had. Calvin McCarty's retired. They're looking for a Canadian back. And my guess is Brock Sunderland's thinking that Chuba Hubbard's going to be available in later rounds. That's my read on that. It wouldn't shock me if Hubbard is wearing green and gold by the end of the night.
Yeah, well, at least from the CFL perspective, because I really feel like he's going to get a legit shot with the Carolina Panthers.
Oh, there you go.
Hubbard, right? Because Matt Rule's wife knew how bad he carved up Baylor when Matt Rule was a head coach there, that she told Matt Rule to make sure that he drafted him, and he does it in the 4th round. He went 126 overall to the Carolina Panthers. Yes, they have Christian McCaffrey, but I think that can be a real benefit for Hubbard because he can go in there and learn. And we got to remember, McCaffrey has a lot of mileage on those tires. So you're looking for that guy always who can be potentially the next back. I'm not saying he's going to overtake McCaffrey, but we saw him last season struggle with injuries after a year where he had a lot of touches on offense. And I'm with you in terms of what the Edmonton football team needs to do. That kid is from Sherwood Park. He's an absolute rock star. After his 2,000-yard season, he was at an Oilers game dropping the puck, right? And you well know they don't just allow anyone to do that. So Brock Sunderland needs to pick Chuba Hubbard. I don't care if he overdrafts him just for the name value and the tie locally alone.
Absolutely, and they're not going to take a flyer with their first-round pick when they know that he's that late. Now, the Ticats have just made the 18th overall pick. I don't want to spoil the mood. You're the Hamilton guy, so go ahead.
Well, it's not updated yet, so we're still waiting on the
CFL
CFL tracker. But if you got it, go ahead, Roddy.
Yeah, they just announced Ole Miss lineman Dean Leonard has been taken by the Hamilton Tiger Cats with the 18th overall pick. Calgary guy, Kent Leonard's kid. I've been hearing about this guy for years, courtesy our good friend Jack Newman, the longtime UFC sports information of. You would know Jack from your visits into Calgary. Absolute beauty. He's been pumping Dean Leonard's tires to me for years, and here he is. He's a Hamilton Tiger Cat now. And to be honest with you, I saw you guys talking about the Nick Cross trade or selection with 9th overall. That surprised me. But I'm sure Hamilton right now is pretty excited that they got Dean Leonard with the last pick of the 2nd round.
I would imagine they're excited, but you're also taking a little bit of a risk there because Leonard goes from the University of Calgary, wins a Vanier Cup in 2019, gets an NCAA Division I scholarship, not just any scholarship, to the Southeastern Conference, as you mentioned, Roddy. Ole Miss had some bumps there and some hiccups, but those were really just, I feel like, learning mistakes there. You're playing at a completely different level in a completely new conference against guys like Mac Jones, who was taken 15th overall by the Patriots as a quarterback. You're playing against the Heisman Trophy winner, Devonta Smith. Like, he actually had reps against Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, guys who were first-round picks. So I feel like in the future, and Kenton Leonard, his dad, is heavily invested in his son doing well, a great resource for him, that Leonard could potentially become a future NFL draft pick. We saw a number of quarterbacks go in the NFL draft from the SEC conference, top among them, obviously, Patrick Surtain out of the University of Alabama, but there were other ones at Georgia, at those schools there. So if Leonard can take what he learned in his first year down there and apply it in his 2nd season, I really believe he can be an NFL draft pick. And it's been a long time, Roddy, since an NFL draft pick has actually played it down in the CFL. Long time. I'm not talking about Americans, but I'm talking about Canadians, so it could be risky.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. No, I'm my mind's scanning right now, thinking about how much things have changed. It's from CFL Draft Day, how the draft has changed itself. I'm thinking Dan Federkyle, I don't think was ever an NFL draft choice, was he? Sam Jaguar, these guys that ended up coming back to the CFL, I don't think they were ever NFL draft choices. Like, if they're drafting you, they're giving you every opportunity in the NFL to stay in the NFL, right? And I think the interesting thing, John Ryan probably doesn't come back to the CFL if he's not signing with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? 14 years in the league. I mean, that's the way things used to be. That's not the way they are now. But, yeah, it's an interesting, like you say, here's the other thing, by the way, with the Ticats, Nick Cross is a gamble. I don't care what anybody says or what the Ticats are going to say when this draft is over. Great player. But you know his history. Dean Leonard, gamble. Jake Burt, not a gamble. We talked about that right off the, like, he's coming. But you know what? If there was ever a draft to take a few risks, I think it's 2021.
Indeed, my man. And the Ticats have made their first pick in the 3rd round to get it rolling. 19th overall, defensive lineman Mohamed Diallo out of the Central Michigan University. A guy that some people refer to, Roddy, as a ghost in this process. They couldn't get a hold of. Clearly, the Ticats must have interviewed him to make him comfortable being that selection. So we're through 19 picks. That means the Saskatchewan Roughriders, due to the snake format, back up on the clock here. They have gone Nelson Lacombo, as you predicted, at number 2. And then with their 2nd round pick, as our John Hodge predicted, just moments before it happened, they went Terrell Jana, receiver. So where are your spidey senses, or maybe your sources telling you they could go in round 3? Is it Borsa? Is it Borsa?
Well, I'm starting to think. Craig Smith today predicted Kyle Borsa would be a 3rd round pick. So if this happens with this next pick, don't give it to me. Give it to Craig Smith. He would have called it. But as I look at positional needs for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the defensive line, there hasn't been a ton of D linemen go in this draft right now. And I could see that. I'm not sure who's left on the board. I'm not a scout. I'm not a general manager. Maybe it is Kyle Borsa's time.
That would be highly intriguing. A lot of people in Regina would be excited, especially his family. You mentioned it earlier. Corey Borsa, his dad, played for the Regina Rams when they were in the CJFL, used to call those games. He's having a party tonight with his family there in Regina, obviously COVID-19 safe. What's the mood like in Regina, Roddy? You're down there on the ground. When we're talking about a kid locally homegrown that could potentially be a superstar, he's got all the athletic traits you want, explosiveness, speed, you name it, he's got it.
Look, they want to see Kyle Borsa go to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I've been sitting here tonight surfing social media, and all his buddies are posting. They've got Borsa jerseys with across rider jerseys across there. But I could send them to you if you want. I mean, Jeremy O'Day comes from the era of local guys playing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? And from the time that he entered the front office in 2011 to now, which is his 2nd draft, he's obviously getting back to that. I'm not saying Kyle Borges is going to be their next pick. And by the way, I see TSN's gone off the air here, so we'll see if it climbs here. By the way, very impressive numbers tonight on YouTube for the 3-down.
We're going strong. Thanks in part to you, buddy.
Well, I don't know about that, but kudos to all the viewers, all the CFL fans that have tuned in from all over the continent, because I've been somewhat active in the comment string here too. But anyways, your question was, and we have to keep our eye on the CFL.ca draft tracker here now with TSN off the air. Regina wants the Riders to draft Kyle Borsa. Okay.
So are they going to be upset now when they hear that 20th overall in the 3rd round, the Riders have selected Bruno LaBelle, tight end, Cincinnati?
Well, yeah, of course. Some of them are going to be upset. And obviously, you've got your draft tracker up here. Sorry, I'm just calling it up here. Bruno LaBelle, a tight end. Yeah, where are you going to put a guy like that? But my guess is they're thinking that Kyle Borges is still going to be available. I don't think we're getting out of this draft without the Rough Riders taking him. But I will remind you, I didn't think he was getting drafted at all. I thought that what I said on my show today was that he will go to bed tonight with a camp invite, maybe even a contract for 2021 with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders. So I'm not overly shocked that they went with LaBelle. I'm just kind of wondering, where does he fit in this offense? Is he a Alberto Wachi, Patrick Lavoie, Spencer Moore kind of fit? Because all those guys are gone. I mean, there is a spot for him in this offense, but I think, let's remember, we have yet to see Jason Maas's offense with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders.
Exactly. I think there could be a fit in that offense, although Bruno LaBelle signed an NFL undrafted free agent contract with the Arizona Cardinals, a guy that was a stout blocker at Cincinnati. I think an underrated athlete, really didn't play a lot in the passing game or get a lot of targets, I should say. So I think you're bang on, Roddy. Jason Maas has shown he's played with fullback in the past, Calvin McCarty. And I think in Saskatchewan, he can go that route and have a guy that is potentially dynamic as a pass target, but is also a very physical blocker who can help open up holes for William Powell and potentially even protect Cody Fajardo.
Yeah, so and they're obviously going to have to wait on him through Arizona Cardinals camp, OTAs at the very least. By the way, they're flying. I'll bid adieu. The Bombers have already made the 21st overall pick, so thanks for inviting me. Great job, guys. I loved it, and great numbers. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Appreciate you, Roddy. Enjoy the rest of the draft, man, and keep going strong on the RP show. We support you for sure.
Thank you, buddy. Keep it up at 3 down. See you guys.
See you later. All right, we got him back in here, Mr. J.C. Abbott. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have just taken Patrice Rene, defensive back, North Carolina, with the 21st overall pick in the 2021 CFL Draft. Little reset here because we're going to be going fast and furious. The live television coverage of TSN has gone off the air. They carried the first 2 rounds. We're going to be here all the rest of the way through. 54 picks in total, 6 rounds in total. JC Abbott, you've been grinding the tape. For the uninitiated and the people just jumping on the live stream now, we can see the number is going up, up, and up. Give us a background in how much you love Canadian football and how much research and work you've done on these prospects.
Well, I think to understand how much I love Canadian football, you're just going to look at my backdrop here. It's filled with knickknacks, mementos, artifacts. I was going through it with you yesterday, Dunk. There's some pretty cool stuff back here from Normie Kwong football cards to Bernie Custis signatures to programs signed by the entire 1956 Edmonton team. So there's everything in behind me that you could possibly hope for, a mini Hall of Fame, if you will. And it's because I love the CFL so much. And so the CFL Draft has been my passion for the last number of years since I started university. I started watching your coverage on CFL.ca was my intro to it. And over the last weeks, months, I've been going through all the prospects and I've watched 150 guys. I've got notes on them all. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if there was ever an unpredictable draft, it was this one. But there shouldn't be any surprises on my end where there's a name that comes off the board that I'm not familiar with.
Indeed, if people are not familiar with JC Abbott, I suggest you do so. You can see our Twitter handles there at the bottom of the screen. I'm at JDunk12, JC at JC_Abbott CFL. This guy is a passionate, you might not say it on here, but Edmonton football team follower. We'll call them the Esks to sort of go halfway between for right now. They don't have a new name. We're still waiting on this, but a guy that absolutely loves Canadian football talent has been grinding away on the tape. So go give him a follow. He's certainly put in all of the requisite research here as these picks start to come off the board fast and furious. And we have another one coming in, a guy that maybe some people felt like fell down the board a little bit. There was some talk about him potentially being a first rounder. He played just across from you there, JC, just outside your window because you're on campus at the University of British Columbia. The BC Lions have selected linebacker Ben Hladek with the 22nd overall pick in the third round of the 2021 CFL Draft. They get the local guy that we talked about. Maybe taken in the first round, maybe taken in the second round, but he's fallen to the fourth.
I'm absolutely shocked that he's available here. When we did our live mock draft, you, me, and John Hodge the other day, I selected Ben Hladek with the 4th overall pick as the BC Lions. That's how much I love this kid. Let's just run through the physical measurables for a second here. Bench press, 29 reps. That's offensive lineman level strength. A 4.66 40, a 10.7 broad jump. That's elite NFL style numbers for explosiveness. And my favorite number, because I think he can rush off the edge a little bit as a defensive end, he runs a 6.66 3 cone. The Devil's 3 cone. That guy has bend.
Woo-hoo-hoo! That is fast, my man. Picks are coming fast and furious. In the third round, 23rd overall, the Edmonton football team has selected Deontay Glover, running back, Shepherd University, a favorite of our colleague John Hodge, recently added to the draft. Very intriguing pick, Mr. Abbott.
Absolutely. If you want to talk about production, and we've talked about production at the running back position a lot in this draft cycle because you have a guy like Chuba Hubbard who had 2,000 yards in the NCAA for Oklahoma State. Well, Deontay Glover, as a senior for Shepherd University in Division II, had over 2,000 all-purpose yards. This guy was a kick returner, a punt returner, a running back. He caught passes out of the backfield. He even covered kicks. So he's a do-it-all guy. He's a little bit slower than maybe someone like Kyle Borsa, who's another running back prospect in this draft, but he's got excellent vision, great change of direction, and he can get the job done in the backfield.
Does Glover have the potential real quickly, because the Red Blacks' next pick is in, to be a starter in the CFL?
I think absolutely. And part of that's to do with the running back position. I'll be the first to tell you that running backs are almost entirely predicated on their surroundings. If you've got a strong offensive line, you don't necessarily need the number one running back in the league to have the best rushing attack. And with a guy like Glover or even Borsa, I think you can comfortably stick them in the backfield if you've got a strong front and just let their athleticism and their vision take over. They'll exploit the holes and they'll get you yardage. You don't have to spend big money on a running back to get a guy who's a capable starter.
All right, the picks are coming at us, man. This is the fun part of it because we get to share the analysis and also the news of the picks. In the third round, 24th overall, offensive lineman Connor Bergoloff out of the University of Saskatchewan, selected by the Ottawa Redblacks. JC, I know you love your big men.
Connor Bergoloff's one of my favorite players in this draft. And quite frankly, I would have taken him if I was making a selection higher than this. He's an all-Canadian at center for the University of Saskatchewan Huskies, a team that runs a very pro-style offense and had the leading rushing attack in U Sports in 2019. And if you watch them, Connor Bergoloff is blowing people off the ball. He's climbing to the second level. He's very stout. He's very powerful. He's maybe not as athletic as some of the other linemen available, but he's going to knock you back.
Physical offensive lineman. I saw him a number of times doing Canada West showcase games out there in that tough Western Conference. Bergoloff, physical on the interior, and of course learned from a Hall of Fame offensive lineman. JC, I thought you were going to mention that, but I'll take it. Scott Flory, the head coach with the Huskies there. It just seems like he continues to turn out offensive linemen. We saw Matlin Riley go in the first round of last year's draft. Another guy of his offensive line goes here again. It just seems like there's a bit of a factory going on there.
Absolutely. And it's that pro style offense they run, right? Scott Flory rips it right out of the CFL, puts it in Saskatchewan, and he's producing linemen at a high level. You mentioned Matlin Riley, who was drafted in the first round by Saskatchewan last year, who played directly beside Connor Bergloff. I personally think Bergloff is a better player than Riley is, and I would have taken him in the first or second round.
And you said it. You mentioned the pro-style offense there, and I think it's important to note the Argos' next pick is in. We'll get to it in a second. Scott Flory obviously was with Mark Trestmans for a long time, so part of that offense is what the Saskatchewan Huskies run. And if you're a CFL fan out there and you're jonesing for football, if you don't feel like 4 games a week is enough, tune into U Sports Football. It's a high caliber, high level, and it's going to show you these next potential superstars or stars or long-term players in the CFL when they come aboard in this league. So Flory is certainly running a pro offense that has the fingerprints of Mark Trestman on it. Obviously, it's Flory's take on it and what he wants to do, but certainly pro style. The Argos pick is in the third round, 25th overall. Defensive lineman Luigi Villain out of the University of Michigan, currently exploring potential transfer opportunities. JC, how do you feel about the pick?
Well, he's actually committed to Wake Forest, Dunk. So he's going to be playing there next year, and he's hoping to capitalize on something Daniel Joseph did last year, where he wasn't utilized, a former four-star recruit from Michigan, and he wants to have a breakout campaign in his senior year for Wake Forest. Now, this is a boom or bust selection for the Toronto Argonauts. He's got all the physical tools. That's why he was a four-star recruit coming out of high school. He's got some twitch. He's got athleticism. He's got strength. The problem, he hasn't played. His career snaps at Michigan, Dunk, is 156. 156 snaps, period, ever. Normally, as a scout, your introduction to a player is you watch 3 games. That's what you write your scouting report off of. If you pick another player in this draft and you watch 3 games, you'll see more snaps in those 3 games than in Luigi Villain's entire career. And he didn't play on the special teams units either. So you don't have that aspect. You hope he has the tools to translate, but you haven't been able to see it on the field.
I like the scout's perspective that you give there because you're actually working for a scouting service. Can you tell us about that real quick and who you're working with?
Yeah, I'm a scouting intern for All 22 Global Scouting Network. So we do work connecting global football teams and global players with the North American market and vice versa. So guys who want to go over and play in Europe, we're scouting them. Global players who are hoping for the CFL, we're just in the process of launching and we're hoping to get verified numbers to really raise the level of football across the globe and connect everybody.
And who are some of the people involved with it that some of our viewers might recognize in terms of names?
Well, the big name at the top is John Peterson. He's in charge of it all. He's a guy who was a personnel guy for Edmonton for a long time. He was in the XFL recently. So that's a guy at the top. And then Brett Morgan, who's the Southeast Scamp for the Calgary Stampeders. Very talented guy, also runs their global scouting program. So when they have a global player on the field having success next year, it's because of him.
You mentioned the Calgary Stampeders. Their third round pick is in, 26th overall, one of my favorite players in this draft. Charlie Moore, linebacker, University of Calgary. He was the team barber for the Dinos during their 2019 Vanier Cup run, heart and soul middle linebacker of that defense. Really well liked by his teammates. And I would say overall, that entire Dinos team really gets along very well. But Moore, tough. A better athlete, I think, than he's been given credit for, off the board at 26. Real quickly, to end the third round, Montreal has made their selection 27th overall. The Alouettes take Chris Fournier, offensive lineman, Lehigh. I know you love the big guys, so let me get your thoughts first on Fournier before Charlie Moore.
Yeah, Fournier is a guy who's a jack of all trades. He played all 5 positions along the offensive line at Lehigh, and it wasn't a very good program. They were a bad football team. And I don't think I've seen very many football teams rely on a single player on the offensive line as much as Lehigh did with Chris Fournier. They put him all over the place, sometimes playing multiple positions in the same game based on where they needed him. He's really athletic, but he maybe doesn't have some pop and power, which is why he falls a little bit here. He's exploring transfer opportunities. He's hoping to get an NFL shot or a bigger from a bigger D1 school than Lehigh, obviously in the FCS. He has a couple offers. UConn comes to mind, but he's a guy who might actually come this year if Montreal wants to offer him a contract. And then when you pivot to Charlie Moore, the note I have for him is lunch pail linebacker. This is a core teamer for the Calgary Stampeders. He's a guy they're very familiar with out of the Dinos program. He hits you. He explodes through you. He finishes with prejudice. I think he's going to make an immediate impact this year, and it goes quite nicely with their former pick in Aman Agba-Mamiga, because you're probably going to have to wait at least half a season for him, if not more. Charlie Moore can come and do some of those things right away, especially on special teams.
Indeed, my man. He will be a core 4 special teamer almost instantly if he's able to earn a roster spot coming out of whatever training camp we might potentially have in 2021, or if we play football in 2022. We're through 3 rounds, JC. Round 4, the Montreal Alouettes have just started it off. 28th overall. Danny Machocha, the GM there with the Owls, selects Patrick Davis, offensive lineman, Syracuse University, Orangeman. How do you feel about that selection?
It's another gamble. Patrick Davis is a player somewhat like Luigi Villain, who hasn't played very much for Syracuse. He has 166 career snaps along the Syracuse offensive line. And let's be frank, in terms of the ranks of college football, most people consider Syracuse to be one of the worst offensive lines in college football over the last number of years. So he's not playing for a bad program. That's problematic from my aspect. I wouldn't have touched him, but he is a Gatineau kid. He's got all the size. Clearly, he's good enough to touch Division I football, but it's a bit of a gamble for my liking.
Lots of gambles I'm hearing from you over there.
Well, that's the nature of these futures picks. Like, Davis is a guy who's going to return to school, and if he earns a starting role, all of a sudden this is a fantastic selection. But if he goes and he doesn't play again, all of a sudden you've drafted a career backup, and that doesn't usually work well in the CFL. The guy that comes to mind, now he's still kicking around the league, but a similar guy was Josiah St. John, who the Riders took first overall out of the University of Oklahoma. Had played something like 4 games ever in his entire career for the Sooners, and that didn't work out well when you're just drafting purely off traits and size. Guys have to be good players too.
Got to play football at some point. Right now, we're in the 4th round. Calgary Stampeders on the clock, 29th overall. Mr. Abbott, I got to say, though, I love your setup, and that Russ Jackson jersey behind you is placed oh so nicely. Calgary has just made their pick, 29th overall. Ellie Graham, linebacker, University of British Columbia. I would say a late riser in the process, played where you are. You're currently on the campus of UBC. So give us the goods on Graham.
So he's a guy that's another projection, but you really like his physical tools. As a linebacker who can move a little bit, he's 6'3", 245-ish pounds. He's a really solid build, runs a 4.86, 21 bench reps. He jumps over 10 feet. These are all things you look for as explosive athletic numbers. Now, the problem is he hasn't played very much over the last couple years at UBC. He came in out of Hamilton as a freshman. He was a fantastic player for the Thunderbirds. He had over 60 tackles that year, a starting linebacker. And then over the past 2 seasons, he hasn't done a whole lot. In 2019, he only had 13 tackles over the course of that 8-game season. He's fallen behind guys who've already been drafted like Nick Cross and Ben Haladic. But with his body and skill set, you hope he's going to be an instant player on special teams. And that's the type of player UBC's produced. Blake Nill collects athletes like they're Pokemon cards. There's always guys buried on that roster who have a skill set that can help in the pros, but maybe doesn't start in U Sports because they're not as good at their starting position.
Indeed, he certainly likes taking athletes and molding them. and seeing what they can turn into, whether he turns them into even different players on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, but he generally recruits athletes. And Graham was a late riser, I really think, for that reason, when people started to uncover him, even though maybe didn't play as much as you would maybe want to. And you talked about the reps that scouts look for earlier, but a guy that might be underrated as an athlete. In the 4th round, the Toronto Argos are on the clock, 30th overall. We've seen the Argos make some intriguing selections in terms of beefing up that offensive line, right? They had their 1st round pick, 7th overall, Peter Nicastro from the University of Calgary, offensive lineman. In the 2nd round, 12th overall, offensive lineman Sage Dockstader goes to the Argos. They did go to the other side on the defensive line with Luigi Villain, but they sort of tried to fortify or at least create some competition and depth in the trenches here. Where do you think the Argos could go? There's so much talk about this team, how they've put a new face on it, lots of new talent in town. What makes sense here for Toronto in the 4th round? And is there anybody on the board that surprised you that they're still there?
There's not a ton of surprises at this point. Guys like Kyle Borsa are probably at the top of the list, just off the top of my head. If you're the Toronto Argonauts, fortunately for you, even though you weren't a very good team in 2019, you've got the best Canadian content in the league right now. So you're not pressed at any positions where you have big needs, which is why they fortified the offensive line in the first couple rounds. Probably where you're looking here is maybe a linebacker. You are going to start 2 guys there. Canadian linebackers are the core of any CFL team in terms of their special teams unit. You might also maybe take a bit of a reach on a DB. You've got Arjun Colquhoun there, Matt Boateng, Robert Woodson, all guys who are starting caliber players, either at corner or safety. Now, you're probably only starting one of them this coming season, but you want some depth in behind them.
Depth is the name of the game, I feel like, when you get to this point in the draft. Or the other way that teams might go, and we haven't seen any of the NFL draft picks selected yet. We've seen some of the undrafted free agents in terms of the NFL and Canadian sign down there be picked off the board, but none of the draft picks. And I was talking about it earlier with Rod Peterson, JC. I'm sure you heard it. Do you feel like there's pressure? You're an Edmonton guy. You grew up an Edmonton football team fan. Is there pressure on Brock Sunderland to take Chuba Hubbard? And are we getting into that range where he wants to make sure he gets them to please the fan base out there?
I think there is a little bit of pressure. I mean, if he ever comes to the CFL, we talk about marketability. We're discussing that right now, how you sell to younger fans the CFL. Well, how about a local kid who rushed for 2,000 yards at Oklahoma State? I mean, had votes for the Heisman Trophy. You don't get much more marketable than that. So there is a little bit of pressure. With a guy like Hubbard, I actually think he will come to the CFL one day. He's in a good situation with the Carolina Panthers. It's a good fit for him. Clearly, Matt Rule and his wife are very excited to have him. But we saw a lot of flaws to his game last year. We saw that he's not a complete player. And when I talked about earlier how running backs are a product of their system, we found out what Chuba Hubbard looks like when the system falls apart a little bit. And he needs some space. He needs open running lanes so he can be a home run hitter. He's not going to generate it with his own creativity. So you want to have the right situation for him. And because he might come to the CFL, this is around the area where you start considering him.
That's what I'm thinking too. And I don't want to put too much pressure on Brock Sunderland, but I just feel like a guy like Chuba Hubbard doesn't get the opportunity to drop the puck in an Oilers game if he's not beloved by the people in Edmonton. So I feel like it's a great opportunity, even just from a public relations standpoint. Yeah, you want to be a great team, but you got a couple draft classes coming in, and you could benefit from just the star power of the name alone and get some attention there. The Argos pick is in the 4th round, 30th overall. Tommy Neal, receiver McMaster, a Guelph native, shout out, a guy that is a big physical target. How do you think the Argos could use him in, quite honestly, a pretty stacked receiving core?
Yeah, the rich get richer here. That's exactly what it is. They've already got Breskison, Brissett. Curly Gittens Jr. is a guy that we haven't mentioned when we're talking about him, and he's a very talented receiver. Levi Noel, also there. I really like Tommy Neild. He's a slot. He's big. He ran faster than I think most people expected. 4.6 at the virtual combine. If you want to consider those accurate measurements, he ran faster than you might have expected. But what I really love about him, Dunk, is how he varies up his routes. He sort of has this innate understanding of space and timing and momentum, where he sort of subtly glides at point, then accelerates out of his breaks, explodes out of his cuts, those type of things that I think can be a really effective weapon as a slot receiver in the CFL. And that's where I see him. But he's big enough that he's going to contribute on special teams right away. So he's not buried on the practice roster or an early cut because you've got so many talented guys in front of him.
The Ottawa Red Blacks pick is in the 4th round, 31st overall. Our first kicker of the draft, JC. Get ready for it. Jake Julian, Eastern Michigan, goes to the Red Blacks. Are you surprised a little bit that a kicker has gone so early and that the Red Blacks have taken one considering Lewis Ward, Richie Leone?
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising. It's perhaps an indication that in the era of the cap squeeze, maybe Richie Leone is not the guy who's going to be there. Now, unlike many other teams, the Red Blacks didn't take a global punter, which was a big topic earlier this or last month now. But with Jake Julian, you're getting a guy who's got a big leg as a punter. He was 3rd team all conference in the MAC for Eastern Michigan. His career average is 43.4 yards per punt. But there are some potential issues there. I'm not the guy to evaluate punters. I'll be the first to admit that. I don't think anyone is the guy to evaluate punters, as we've seen by how many punters bust. You just don't know. It's a position with too many variables. So I lean on some data, and Pro Football Focus is a thing I use. And for their punting grades, his grade last year, despite the fact he had a very good average, was a 54.6. which is not a great grade for in terms of his placement, hang time, those sorts of things. Now, for example, Cody Grace, the punter Calgary took, the 4th punter off the board in the global draft, he had an 89. That was his grade. So that shows you sort of the discrepancy maybe in talent between some of these guys. I've been on record as saying some of these global punters are upgrades. They're not just a selection you make because you have to. They're upgrades at the position. But clearly, Ottawa likes the strength of Jake Julian's leg enough to choose him over potentially having a global guy.
The Edmonton Eskimos, or Edmonton football team, I should say, I'm going to make that mistake probably a few more times, have made their pick in the 4th round, 32nd overall. It lists him as a quarterback, and I got really excited for a second because I remember he did play quarterback. Dominic Johnson, University of Buffalo, was a quarterback originally when he went to play for the UB Bulls, shifted to receiver. I'm real curious, though. If you're going to list him as a quarterback, man, you're going to get me excited, especially on the CFL.ca live tracker. But where do you see him fitting in best at the CFL level?
Well, he's another big projection because he's played a bunch for Buffalo at receiver in this last year, but he didn't catch many passes. He was a blocker on the outside in a very powerful Buffalo Bulls rushing offense with Jared Patterson in the backfield. And he blocked extremely well on the outside. He's got that big size. He's 6'5", 220 is what he's listed at. He's also a basketball player for the Bulls. And you wonder if maybe he fits in as an H-back or a fullback, a guy who can block and use that skill set, or a big slot who you can come have crack down on guys. But if he goes back to school and he utilizes that 6'5", 220-pound frame, and he has a breakout year as a receiver, now all of a sudden you're talking about something completely different because he is very smart. He's very athletic as a quarterback, and he has oodles of potential. His brother, by the way, is Theo Johnson, who's a freshman tight end for Penn State, who was the top-ranked Canadian recruit in the 2020 class. And he's very similar in terms of his athleticism.
That's the kind of goods that you get when you come to 3 Down Nation and the live stream, man. Theo Johnson could be an absolute star. Dominic Johnson, an intriguing set of skills in terms of an athlete. And the Argos have made their pick 4th overall, in the 4th round, I should say, 33rd overall, Trevor Hoyt, linebacker, Carleton. Now, we've seen in recent years some linebackers come out of Carleton. Jack Cassar, the big-named one who went to the Argos a year ago in the earlier rounds. Where does Hoyt fit in terms of those recent Ravens linebackers who are trying to carve out a career in the CFL?
Well, he's not as much of a thumper like a Jack Cassar who comes downhill and takes your head off. He's more athletic than that. He might actually project as a safety at the next level, although he doesn't have great long speed, but he's quicker than fast is how I would describe him. He's got a great first step, change of direction ability. He may be the best form tackler, in my opinion, available in this draft. He has great stopping power in space. And I really see him as a special teams demon, a guy who's going to rack up the tackles for you. And that's really what the Argos needed. They needed some depth in behind guys like Enoch Mwama, Cameron Judge, Jack Cassar, somebody who's going to take those special teams reps and be able to step in an emergency situation.
And we have our next pick in the 4th round, 34th overall, Robbie Lowe's, linebacker, University of Regina, selected by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I feel like, JC, I know this was one of your favorites in this draft.
He's a guy who's got really nice size. He's very versatile. He did a bunch of different things at the linebacker position. And I think he sorts through the muck as well as anybody available. He really has a good eye for the running back, good vision. He can slip under those blocks and make tackles. He can even do some good things in zone coverage. But he was also a blocked punt specialist. He had a couple of big blocked punts for the University of Regina. And I think he'll be a great special teamers, sort of the hard hat type of guy that Winnipeg covets with Mike O'Shea there. And they're a little bit thin at national linebacker, which is uncommon for them. They've only got Jesse Briggs and Shane Gauthier there. So this is a natural fit.
Yeah, Robbie Lowe's is a guy that just gets after it. And we have our next pick in from the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the 4th round, 35th overall, Elaine Simikinda, defensive lineman, University of Guelph. He had transferred down to Ottawa, was going to you're planning to play for Carleton. That didn't happen because the 2020 U Sports season was canceled. But by all accounts, Simikinda absolutely dominated in high school and carried a lot of that over to the U Sports level. I feel like a guy with a lot of upside, JC.
Absolutely. I love this pick. One of my favorite picks so far. I think he's a guy that helps the Saskatchewan Roughriders right away. Now, Elaine Simikinda had 11 sacks in 2019 in the U Sports season. Now, you expect, because he's listed as a defensive end, that was coming off the edge. Not so, in fact. He's not a great bender. He's not a great edge rusher. What he does is at 6'1", 245, he plays really well on the inside. He's bull strong in there. He's got quick hands, and he's a great pass rusher as a 3-tech. So if you want to put him in behind a guy like Mac Henry, who's not getting any younger, I think he gives way more pass rushing upside than the guys they already have.
The Ticats pick is in the 4th round, 36th overall. The last pick in the 4th round, Hamilton selects linebacker Jarek Richards, St. Mary's University. Little bit of an off-the-board pick here, but if you know the Ticats well, Drew Alamang, co-manager of football operations, in my mind, their lead Canadian scout, Sean Burke, does a lot of it as well. They have a great staff there that works all together. They go and get Jarek Richards. I'm going to say right off the bat, got to be a guy with high character to be selected by the Ticats and allowed in that locker room.
Absolutely. And he may be a surprise to some people. He's not a surprise to me. He was actually my, 6th ranked linebacker on my board personally. I really like him. He might be a guy you move to safety as well, a little bit undersized for the linebacker position, only 205 pounds. But but he just flies around the football field in the AUS. He's great in pursuit. He's a reliable tackler in space, and he's going to be a special teams demon. I just love what he can do, just sort of dipping under guys, going upfield. He did a lot of it for St. Mary's, and I think he'll do it at the next level.
The Ticats end the 4th round there, and they're on the clock in the 5th round with back-to-back picks, 37th overall. Do you get worried, though, about any of these prospects coming from the AUS? Because it seems like it's, I hate to say it, but by a decent margin, the conference in Canada that is behind everyone else in U Sports in terms of the RSEQ, OUA, Canada West, they all seem to be ultra competitive. But the AUS seems to be behind everyone, at least a couple steps.
Yeah, you do get concerned. You wonder about if things translate. Now, if a guy has the physical tools to back it up, like I think Jarek Richards does, then you don't worry as much because you know those tools are what you see on film. It's when those things don't match up that you have some serious questions. Whereas if maybe they played at a higher level of football and weren't necessarily the best athlete, you'd still take a pick on them. If they're playing in the AUS, you think maybe that production is inflated.
The Ticats have made their first selection in the 5th round, 37th overall. The first selection, I should say, the 5th round overall. Felix Gauthier-Garand, fullback from Laval University, the Rouge et Or. They develop physical players there. We thought that maybe the Ticats would look at Bruno Labelle earlier in the draft. He went to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, at the top of the draft, the Ticats selected Jake Burt, a tight end who many thought might be lining up at that H-back, fullback, tight end, receiver position. But does this pick potentially show that Burt might actually be being viewed as a slot back in the CFL and allow Gauthier to play fullback?
I think they're building a stable of very similar players is what they've done. So they already had Nikola Kalinic, who had great success as a tight end, fullback, can play in the slot. Then they added Jake Burt, who is a similar guy, but coming from the NCAA ranks. And Garand Gauthier is another guy just like that, sort of a longer H-back type. He's one of the better route runners among fullbacks that I've seen. And the accolades back it up. This guy was an all-Canadian at fullback. That does not happen. They give 2 running back spots, and they decided in 2019 to go, no, we're not going to honor 2 running backs. We're going to honor this fullback who had, 9 catches for 197 yards because he's that physical. He's an enforcer. Now, his technique needs some work as a blocker. I think he's raw still, but he'll take your head off.
He certainly will. And that's how they make him at Laval. You got to be physical to get on the field there. And certainly Garand Gauthier fits that mold overall. The Saskatchewan Roughriders on the clock in the 5th round, 38th overall. They've gotten a little bit of value in the draft here, JC, with Terrell Jana falling to them, Elaine Simikinda. They took in the 4th round. And then, of course, in the 3rd round, Bruno Labelle, the tight end we talked about earlier. In the 1st round, they went Nelson Lacombo, defensive back. And there was a lot of talk coming into the draft about potentially taking Kyle Borsa. That hasn't happened yet because the Riders' pick is in. It's offensive lineman Logan Bandy from the University of Calgary, a player that had a lot of buzz coming into the draft with potential to be selected in the high rounds of the draft, slides to the 5th round. Why do you think that's happened? And have the Riders gotten some value?
I think they've gotten great value. I'm surprised he fell this far. Now, I was a little bit lower on Bandy than maybe some other people were. Clearly, scouts agreed with me a little bit here. He's got a really good build. He can pinch hit for you at tackle, but he's a good guard. He's really nasty, but I find him a bit of a lumberer. He's got some heavy feet. He tested okay in terms of his speed and change of direction, but I wonder about his mobility a little bit, and I think that's why he fell here. He's also not really a puncher. He's got a wicked club, but he sort of latches on and then wrestles you to the ground. He's got to be coached out of that a little bit, but he's an upgrade over a lot of the depth pieces that Saskatchewan has in place.
And we were just talking about and wondering, where might Kyle Borsa go, and will it be in Saskatchewan? He's got his family gathered tonight, COVID-19 friendly, in Regina. And with the 5th pick, 39th overall in the 2021 CFL Draft, Kyle Borsa has his name called by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, fitting in a sense because there were comparisons prior to the draft between Kyle Borsa and Nick Dembski. To be fair, Nick Dembski is a hell of a player, has developed into a legitimate playmaking threat as a receiver or a running back, can do many different things for an offense, also does some of the dirty work there for the Bombers. So Borsa has a long way to go and to develop, but he goes to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, can learn from Nick Dembski, who's a receiver / running back, can learn from Andrew Harris, who, as we know, is a superstar in this league as a Canadian running back. I shouldn't even call him Canadian, just a running back. They have Johnny Augustine at the running back position, who looks ready to potentially take over whenever it is that Andrew Harris decides to hang it up. Do you like the Borsa pick?
I do like the Borsa pick. Now, I thought you were going to go for the low-hanging fruit with the comparison between Andrew Harris and Kyle Borsa when it comes to suspensions for certain illicit substances in their bloodstream, because he was suspended for the 2019 season because he tested positive for a performance-enhancing substance, as did Andrew Harris. But he's also a similar player. I think he's very explosive. He's got great vision. He's got a little bit of wiggle in the hole. I do think a comparison to Andrew Harris is apt, as well as his pass catching ability. And that's where he really takes it over the top.
Nick Dembski, you mean?
No, I think Andrew Harris. I don't quite see him as the same receiver that Dembski is. I see him as more of a pure running back. And Andrew Harris brings great receiving value out of the backfield. I think Borsa does similarly. Maybe he's more of a slot, but I don't think he's quite as, elusive in that capacity as Nick Dembski is.
So we've got you on the record. Kyle Borsa is going to be just as good as Andrew Harris.
Well, okay, hold on.
Fair enough. But you see with Borsa, the ability, even though, he hasn't played in a while. He had the suspension in 2019. Obviously, the U Sports season was canceled in 2020. But elite speed, I don't care, Canadian, American, or whatever, 4.46 in the 40-yard dash, that checks that box in that category. And he talked about it. He lives in the weight room. That guy is committed. And Mike O'Shea really wants character kids to come into that locker room. It's a very sacred place for O'Shea. So the fact that he's going to trust Borsa to come in there and learn from those guys and not disrupt any of the relationships that are currently happening in there, and that's part of the reason why they won a Grey Cup in 2019. They're still the reigning Grey Cup champions because we haven't played football in so long. But to me, Borsa is very intriguing, and a lot of these draft picks, it ends up being key where they go and can they get developed, and does the team take them seriously? And I really feel like the Bombers will do that because they've shown to do that with the Canadians. Andrew Harris, Johnny Augustine, Nick Dembski, we laid it out. Those guys legit playmaking threats for the Bombers. We've got a few picks to get to in the 5th round. 40th overall, the BC Lions select Alfred Green, Wilfrid Laurier, defensive lineman. I'll rattle them off and then we'll get to some analysis. In the 5th round, 41st overall, the Edmonton football team takes offensive lineman Peter Curtis, St. Mary's University. In the 5th round, 42nd overall, the Red Blacks select long snapper Keegan Markgraf out of Utah. In the 5th round, 43rd overall, there it is. This is the one we got to talk about, JC. He's from down the road. I believe it's Highway 2 that's between Edmonton and Calgary. Chuba Hubbard grew up in Sherwood Park. I would imagine was an Edmonton football team fan, but their rival, the Calgary Stampeders, have selected Chuba Hubbard in the 5th round, 43rd overall in the 2021 CFL Draft. Did the Edmonton football team make a mistake in not taking him earlier, perhaps just 2 picks ago at number 41?
I'll hold off on saying mistake, although I would have had him above a guy like Peter Curtis, because we don't know if he will come here. Now, I think he will eventually, but if he never comes here, then it doesn't look like a mistake, right? You're not drafting a guy who never played in the CFL, so it's a smart decision in that regard if he sticks with the Carolina Panthers. Now for Calgary, I think it's a slam dunk if he does come in the reverse, right? You're stealing him from Edmonton. You've still got an Alberta kid. It's still the same marketability. Think of the rivalry games, the Battle of Alberta, the Labor Day Classics. If Chuba Hubbard is in the backfield for the Stampeders, I think it's a fantastic selection there. To rattle off a few of the other guys, Elfrid Green is a good developmental defensive end. He plays a little bit high, but he has some tools. He's got that Wilfrid Laurier stamp of approval, a program that's produced a lot of linemen in recent years. Peter Curtis, who Edmonton did take, very strong AUS offensive lineman. He maybe didn't test as well as I expected, but if you watch him, he actually played some kick coverage as an offensive tackle, going down and making tackles on special teams, which is absolutely ridiculous. And he's a little bit stiff, but he's got some edge that you like to see. And Keegan McGrath is one of the best long snappers in the NCAA. He's not coming up here this year. He's a futures pick. He'll be back with the Utah Utes next year, hoping to get an NFL shot, but was a finalist for the Patrick Manley Award last year as the best senior long snapper in the NCAA.
All right, and the Stamps' next pick is in the 5th round, 44th overall receiver, Luther Hakuvenuhu from York University, a guy that a lot of people don't normally look at York University as being a mine, let's say, for CFL talent, but they're known for getting ultra-athletic players there. And I would imagine that's how the Stampeders feel about this pick.
Yeah, they're not a CFL factory by any stretch. York is a struggling program in many regards, and when it comes to on the field, they're not a powerhouse in the OUA. But what they've done to try and punch above their weight class is they've taken on a lot of athletic project guys. And what ends up happening is those are the guys that get selected at the end of the CFL draft because they're still those athletic projects that are very enticing to CFL teams. And Hakuna Vanhu is one of those guys. He's a massive receiver, almost 6'4", 210 pounds, used to play for the Edmonton Wildcats of the CJFL, had good production, a little bit inconsistent for York, but really long arms, really physical. And he was a special teams demon. This guy had 9 tackles last season for the York Lions. 9 tackles on special teams. That's going to translate immediately for the Calgary Stampeders.
Let's go back one pick for the Stamps, Chuba Hubbard. It seems like they're trying to get one of these dynamic running backs because just a few years ago, they took Tyler Varga in the CFL draft. And we touched on it earlier, but we have a new audience here, so I'll go over it with the uninitiated. Varga is the last Canadian running back to play a down in an NFL game, signed an undrafted free agent contract with the Indianapolis Colts following the 2015 NFL draft, although unfortunately suffered a concussion with the Colts in his rookie season, which eventually caused him to retire. The Stamps had taken him in the later rounds of the CFL draft, and really because of injuries, don't see him on the field. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard went higher and was an actual pick in the NFL draft, so that's going to have more currency, give him an opportunity to develop potentially there and make the roster, I would imagine, especially with how much Carolina head coach Matt Rule likes him and has seen of him at Baylor, and we know Matt Rule's wife loves him. But the Stamps here take a home run swing. In the later rounds, right, we're getting to the end of the 5th round, Chuba Hubbard could be an absolute superstar in the CFL, especially if he's in that Dave Dickinson offense. Imagine Chuba Hubbard lining up behind Bo Levi Mitchell. That would be highly entertaining.
Absolutely. That would be crazy. And Chuba Hubbard is a guy I think fits the CFL game a little bit more. He needs those open spaces. And if you give them to him, his speed, he was a former track star in Alberta, he'll just take off and exploit it for the big play. So if you give him a CFL field, incredible things can happen.
Certainly. We just had the last pick in the 5th round, 45th overall, David Cote, kicker, Laval. Danny Machocha going to his backyard there that he knows well in Quebec. Another Frenchman Give us the goods on Cote, JC.
Well, he's a very efficient kicker. He's 83% for his career. Hasn't hit a lot of long kicks, but you like the accuracy. And here's the thing. He tests like he should start at safety. He was one of the leaders at the combine as a kicker. He's 6'4", 223 pounds. He runs a 4.76, and he jumps 10 feet 2 inches. And his 3-cone is a 6.53. Shuttle is a 4 flat. Those are insane, like NFL style athletic numbers. And he's a kicker. And it really reminds me of a guy who's already on the Alouettes roster, which is Felix Bernard-Briere, who came out of the University of Montreal a couple years ago and blew up the combine as a punter. This is a very similar type of guy, although he's more of a kicker than a punter. It's that same crazy athleticism where you wonder, can we do some other things with him on top of his kicking ability?
The Alouettes end the 5th round, and they start the 6th in the snake draft format. 9 more picks to go, JC, in the home stretch here. We've been on the air for over 3 hours, but honestly, dude, it's felt like just half an hour because the time has gone by. When you love what you do, man, we're talking about football. It's nice to finally do it because all that seemingly be coming out, for the last year since the pandemic hit is will they or won't they play? And then now what's going to happen with the XFL. But we're talking football. That's why it's gone by so fast. So we're over the 3-hour mark. You've been giving some great analysis, some awesome nuggets, enlightening me on a lot of these players. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers that have tuned in throughout. So we have 8 more picks to go because the Alouettes have made potentially their final selection of the draft, unless they trade back into the 6th round and taken, surprise, surprise, a player from Montreal. Ethan Macanzo, linebacker, goes to the Owls in the 6th round, 46 overall.
Yeah, Danny Machocha loves his Montreal Carabin. And this is a guy I really would have liked to see in 2020 because I think he had more than he maybe showed in 2019. He's a bigger safety at 6'1", 210 pounds. I sort of describe him as a broke man's Taylor Loeffler. He's not near the same type of player, at least the last time we saw him, but he plays in a similar way. He's got some surprising range. He can thump in the pass game. There was maybe some periods of inactivity that I saw from him. He needs a little bit more burst, but he's got all the tools to be a really good free safety in the CFL. And the added storyline here is Ethan Macanzo is actually the brother of Enoch Macanzo, who's going to be a top prospect probably next year, depending on how things shake out with how they determine the eligibility with all that's going on in the NCAA. But a guy who was an absolute standout. One of the reasons why Coastal Carolina was such a riser in the NCAA last year was because Enoch Macanzo, Ethan's brother, was flying off the edge and playing the safety position at a high level. And I think Montreal will see Ethan as a guy that can do a similar thing if given the right situation.
Indeed, I would imagine they feel like he's a now guy and can come in and contribute on special teams for them. So with that, the Alouettes don't currently have another selection in the 2021 CFL Draft. Up next, the Toronto Argos in the 6th round, 47th overall. We have 8 more picks left in the draft. This is one of the Argos picks that they got in, believe it was the Eric Rogers deal when they swapped there with the Calgary Stampeders, and the pick is in. Very intriguing, a thumper, downhill player. DB Joshua Haggerty from the University of Saskatchewan goes in the 6th round, 47th overall to the Argos.
Yeah, 6'4", 195 pounds. He's got some stopping power as a tackler from the safety position. I think his build immediately translates to special teams. I didn't like him as a pure DB as much as some of the other guys. He was a little bit lower on my list, but you bump up guys like that because they have such special teams value. He's not going to be overwhelmed by physicality or knocked off his trajectory by blockers because he's so big and thick.
Indeed, that leaves the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on the clock in the 6th round, 48th overall. So we have 7 picks left in the draft. It was 6 rounds long, 54 picks, shortened this year because the CFL didn't play football in 2020, and they didn't want to have too many players come into camp. Double cohort year, so that means there's going to be a lot of competition, especially for Canadians, coming into these potential training camps in 2021 if they actually do play football. The Bombers have made their selection at 48 overall. It's defensive back Shea Weeks out of the University of Manitoba, who went down and played at Bemidji State last year in 2020 to ensure that he played some football. JC, did that benefit him?
Well, he didn't actually play because Bemidji State had their season canceled. So he got to practice, but he didn't get to play. So he took a gamble. It didn't pay off. But he's a guy who, if you just wanted to evaluate on wow factor, he'd be a lot higher on this draft list because he makes some plays that are absolutely insane. Blind turns, big hits, breaking on the ball like crazy. He's a guy who was an all-Canadian candidate his whole time with the Manitoba Bisons. He's got a crazy burst when he puts his foot in the ground. He reads plays really well, but he freelances a little bit. He maybe had some questions with that coaching staff that dropped him down boards, and he's a little bit undersized. So he's got some factors that work against him. But at the top end, one of the more talented players available in a deep DB class.
In the 6th round, 49th overall, the Ottawa Redblacks have selected Matthew Dirks, offensive lineman out of Delaware State. A big fella for you, JC.
Yeah, he's a thick, powerful dude. He's 6'4" and 323. Now, I think he's a really tough player, but he's a little athletically limited. Played for not a very good program at Delaware State, although they have a nice Canadian running back in the backfield for him to block for. He's really strong at the point of attack, but he can sometimes get caught leaning, doesn't recover as well, and he doesn't necessarily have the ability to move directionally as some of the other players available. It's a solid pick this late in the draft. There's always value in Canadian offensive linemen like him. I'm not sure it's going to be a home run selection.
Who's the Canadian playing running back there? Enlighten us.
I think they might actually have 2. I'm blanking on the second. He's a little younger. It's Thomas Bertrand Houdin is the running back that's jumping to mind right now. I think he's available next year.
Gotcha. So in the 6th round, the Edmonton football team has made their selection. 50th overall, defensive back Keenan Clark out of Cornell University. Do you have this guy on your DB board?
I do, actually. I'm shocked. I'm shocked he was selected, but I put him on there because I knew about him.
I knew you'd have him.
This is a wild card. This is why you prepare all the little bits and pieces. He's a bit player for Cornell most of the time. He wasn't a full-time starter, but saw some time at cornerback for them. In 2019, he had 14 tackles, a pick, 2 pass deflections, played a bunch on special teams. That's probably where Edmonton sees him. And this is a guy, he was under the radar. I mean, he didn't receive a combine invite, to my knowledge. He didn't test. So maybe other teams missed out on him, but a very smart guy going to Cornell. He was a great player coming out of high school and someone who's got some special teams upside for Edmonton.
BC's pick is in the 6th round, 51st overall. Offensive lineman Tyler Packer, University of Calgary, goes to the BC Lions. That's now, by my count, 3 Calgary offensive linemen the Dinos have had taken in this draft. Peter Nicastro in the 1st round, Logan Bandy went off the board as well, and now Packer. What, in terms of the differences, are there for Packer that had him slide down the board further than Nicastro and Bandy?
Well, Packer's a bit of an unknown. He had the glow up of the draft, if you were, because he played at 340 pounds for the University of Calgary. He was overweight. He was a bit lumbering. And so when he was going into the draft process, he knew that would hurt him, and he cut all that weight. He weighed in at the combine at 305. He knocked off 35 pounds, and he looks like a different human being. And because you haven't seen him on the field, you don't know how that projection works. Is he still that lumbering guy, or is he a much better athlete now that he's 35 pounds lighter? And so that uncertainty probably knocks him down. He's a bit raw, but he's very physical. He was a rookie of the year in 2017 for the Dinos, has lots of talent, and you want to get your hands on him and see what he is now.
He's going the other way. A lot of people putting on weight during COVID-19. He's lean and mean and trimming it off and getting ready for his pro shot. We have just had another pick come off the board in the 6th round, 52nd overall. Our second NFL draft pick has been selected in the CFL draft. The Argos take defensive back Benjamin. Let me say that again. The Argos take defensive back Benjamin St. Just out of the University of Minnesota, 52nd overall. So to me, that's a gamble pick. How do you see it, JC?
Yeah, it's a gamble pick. Generally, I wouldn't touch anyone that's drafted 3rd round or higher. That would be my personal philosophy. But this late in the draft, there's not a whole lot of skin in the game. It's a pick that if he pans out, has huge potential. And if it fails, well, most players selected at 52nd overall fail anyway. That's just the nature of how a draft goes. So not a lot of risk involved in this selection. But if he comes up north at some point, I mean, there was a reason he was selected 74th overall by the Washington football team. Uncommon size. He's a unicorn. He's 6'3" and 205 pounds as a corner. Really long and shockingly athletic for that size. Now, he's more of a press man corner that doesn't translate as well to the CFL game. I sort of saw him maybe as more of a safety for the CFL, but a guy the certain NFL schemes really covet as a long physical corner. He's got a little bit of stiffness, but not too much, and enough that I think he'll have a solid NFL career.
2 picks left in the final round of the CFL draft. The Riders and the Ticats will end it. The Tiger Cats started it off by taking Jake Burt, tight end, Boston College, 1st overall, spent 2020 with the New England Patriots. The Riders on the clock here. Then we'll get the Ticats final pick. JC, what kind of happens here at the end of the draft in your mind? We just saw St. Just go off the board. Do you feel like we could see some futures in terms of the picks being more of a gamble here, especially with the double cohort, or we're going to see now players come off the board? And we've got to remember, it's still just the 6th round. Normally there would be 8 rounds plus a couple non-counters that get added pretty much on waivers after the draft. So we've reduced it 2 rounds here. Still valuable picks and a lot of talent left on the board.
Yeah, I think in terms of futures picks, there's not really guys I would touch. I'd be surprised if they take a Josh Palmer. I'd be surprised if Javon Holland goes off the board. These are guys I see as essentially NFL locks for several years. Now, somebody who could come off the board that you're not going to see this year, if a team really likes him, might be someone like Olivier Charles-Pierre out of Houston. He's a guy I don't think fits the CFL game very well. He's 370 pounds as a nose tackle, Dunk. It's insane. He moves well for that size, but there's a limit to how well you can move at 370 pounds. That works in the NFL game where you're a run stuffer, a 2-gapper, something like that. In the CFL game, that doesn't really exist. So he might be a late selection if a team wants. He's not someone I would touch. I would go for now guys.
And that looks to be what the Riders have done in the 6th round, 53rd overall. The Riders select defensive back Matt Watson, Mount Allison University, all the way from AUS, bringing him to Regina.
Yeah, very athletic dude. He's got a physical edge to his game, breaks on the ball with some force. He doesn't necessarily have the length of some of the other DBs, but something you can move to safety, and it's going to be very tenacious on special teams.
The Ticats on the clock with the final pick in the 2021 CFL draft. They started it off mentioned it a couple minutes ago, but just to reiterate, with a bit of a surprise pick, number 1 overall. A lot of people behind the scenes in league circles felt like Terrell Jana was going to go number 1 to Hamilton, the receiver. It seemed to fit a need, but they go with Jake Burt, who from the public's eye was a late addition to the draft, but knowing the Ticats and the amount of work they put in to scouting the CFL draft, I would imagine they would have known that Jake Burt could have qualified a long time ago. Burt himself knew he had conversations about potentially going into the draft a year ago, or at least getting himself eligible, but he decided to focus on finishing his career at Boston College and then signing an undrafted free agent contract with the New England Patriots. He spent a year there learning from Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels, was not retained, was not re-signed, and it's benefited the Ticats here because he's put his name into the CFL draft. They get a versatile piece. We'll see when the pick comes in here who the Ticats finish it off with. But JC, I want to get you prepped because even though it might be fresh, I'm curious, after the Ticats pick, I want to get some of your favorites in the draft and an on the spot who you feel like might have had the best draft overall. And the pick is in the final selection in the 2021 CFL draft in the 6th round, 54th overall, linebacker Miles Manalo out of Western University. What's your take on Manalo before we shift to some post-draft analysis?
Yeah, I can see why someone would really like Manalo. Now, he's someone I was a little bit lower on. He's not the quickest guy out there, but he's physical enough. I think he plays a little bit too high, and he's not as strong at the point of attack as I would like, but he separates the football. Like, he goes for the ball, he rips it loose, and he's got a quick enough first step to play in the CFL, a solid special teams pick with the last pick in the draft.
All right. I told you I was going to set you up for it. The draft is now complete. 6 rounds, 54 picks. It started with the Ticats, finished with the Ticats, but there was lots of intrigue in between. Some risers, some fallers. Clearly, there were some teams out there that did a great job of playing these picks close to the vest. So overall, JC, first of all, I want to get, if you can pick one selection in the draft, who was your favorite choice? And what?
Ooh, favorite choice. That is a tough one. I'm going to say Terrell Jana at 17 to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Personally, I just think the value there is insane. Terrell Jana is a guy I look at as a potential perennial 1,000-yard receiver in the CFL. It might not be a need for Saskatchewan, but how do you pass that up? I think he fell a little bit because his athleticism is not as good as maybe people want. He runs about a 4.7. He doesn't blow you away with his explosiveness, but he's so smart. He sees the game so well, and he reads those holes in zones. He reads leverage, and he can find the open spaces in a defense to exploit them. And that's all you need to be a CFL slot back and go for 1,000 yards every year. So it blew my mind that he went to 17, and it's a no-brainer pick for Saskatchewan.
Yeah, at some point, even though you do all of this testing and the combine stuff and the underwear Olympics, they call it, before the draft, you got to play football. And Terrell Jana can certainly do that. He seems like he has a game that's tailor-made for the CFL. On the flip side, what was the pick that surprised you the most, caught you off guard, a guy that maybe slid that you didn't expect, a team that maybe picked a player that you felt like was overdrafted? So overall, who was the most surprising pick for you in 2021?
Well, lucky for me, I wasn't on air at the time because I was taking a sip of water and I almost electrocuted my laptop because I spat it all out. At number 5, the Edmonton football team goes Cole Nelson, defensive tackle out of the University of Alberta. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't want to knock Cole Nelson too much. I'm sure he's a swell guy. I'm sure he's got some talent. But he's a guy who in 2019 had 11 tackles in the best season of his career. He just hasn't been on the field. Now, he's huge, right? He's 6'6", he's 311 pounds, and he runs a sub 5 40 at that size. Just a freak athlete. but he's never been productive at the U Sports level, not even the NCAA level, the U Sports level. So for him to go at 5 absolutely floored me. Now, if there was a team to take that risk, of course, it's Edmonton. He's in the same city. I'm sure they've done all their research on him, worked him out. They're very familiar with him. So I don't want to be too harsh, but he's certainly not someone I would have even touched in the first round, let alone the second or even the third, in my opinion.
That was definitely the shocker of the draft. And the viewers might have seen multiple times, I've been looking down on my phone, getting intel from sources around the league. That was the pick that stood out to them as the most surprising because, as you mentioned, Cole Nelson hasn't, to be fair, proven himself at the U Sports level, but they always felt like Brock Sunderland goes off the board and he very much does his own evaluations and is staunch in how he feels about it. He's going to be confident in picking Nelson. It's a local kid, so I'm sure they'll like it there in Edmonton, but that certainly surprised a lot of people, especially when you had some other intriguing players on the board there. Let's say, for example, an Amen Ogbongbemiga. You could argue that Edmonton needs some help at linebacker, but he ends up sliding down the board, and the Calgary Stampeders take Amen Ogbongbemiga right out from under them. Similar pick happens with Chuba Hubbard. And on that note, in terms of the NFL players, we saw a couple of the draft picks get selected. The ones who were not, there were 4 for the people that did not tune in to the 2021 NFL draft. 4 Canadians went, tying the record for the most ever in a single NFL draft, which was set in 2014. Javon Holland, defensive back, Oregon, went in the second round to the Dolphins. Josh Palmer, receiver out of Tennessee, went to the Los Angeles Chargers. Benjamin St-Juste, defensive back out of Minnesota and Michigan, too, to be fair, went to the Washington football team. And Chuba Hubbard, running back, Oklahoma State, that 2,000-yard season that is seared into everyone's mind in Canada that follows the football players that are talented up here. 2 of those players go, 2 of them don't. And you mentioned, JC, earlier that you wouldn't necessarily want to risk taking a player that was picked in the 3rd round or higher in the NFL draft. But we saw all of the players that signed undrafted free agent contracts go in various orders. But Alaric Jackson was picked. Bruno Labelle was taken off the board. Pierre-Olivier Lestage was gone as well. And there's one other one that's slipping my mind right now. Who's the 4th?
Did you mention Alaric Jackson?
I did. Be Amen Ogbongbemiga would be the
there
4th.
we go.
That's all 4. Yeah. Boom. So was there any surprises there in terms of maybe Josh Palmer not being selected or Javon Holland not being selected in the later rounds?
When it comes to Javon Holland, absolutely not. I mean, he's the first safety off the board in the NFL draft, the top player at his position. It may have been the 2nd round, but safety's not valued as high as it once was for the NFL. But this is a kid who's going to start very early in his career. He's going to have a role for a long time in the NFL. Now, perhaps if you're someone like BC, you maybe want to take a sentimental pick for a kid who's got your logo tattooed on his arm. But in a 6th round draft, there's no value in that for a kid is not going to come to Canada. If it's 8 rounds, maybe you take him with the last pick in the 8th round or something like that. But 6, I'm not going there. Palmer, I wouldn't have selected him. I'm a little surprised no one else did, simply because those type of guys generally come off the board at some spot. You saw Neville Gallimore get selected last year, even just for some of the press that comes with a selection like that. But another guy I think is going to have a long and plentiful NFL career, who was in a terrible situation at Tennessee, produced despite of some awful quarterback play and chaos in that program, and was one of the only people to beat Patrick Surtain, the 9th overall selection in the NFL draft, for a touchdown last year. Just absolutely toasted him in what we called the Battle of Brampton between Josh Palmer for Tennessee and John Mechie III for Alabama, 2 Canadian receivers hailing from Brampton, Ontario. So he's got that top end skill to to stick in the NFL. And some people, some respected draft analysts, had him as a top 10 receiver in the entire draft in one of the deepest positions available in the modern NFL. So that speaks very highly of Josh Palmer.
A lot of talk of the Canadians in the NCAA. Was there a U Sports prospect that you were surprised wasn't picked in this draft?
There's a couple guys that I was a little shocked didn't go. Will Corby out of the University of Toronto is one I'm surprised didn't go. He's very fast. Now, I can see why he wasn't selected. I was a little lower on him than I expected to be, simply because he takes the top off the defense, but he doesn't really run a whole lot of other routes on the route tree. But at the same time, he averaged more than 23 yards a reception for the Varsity Blues when Clay Sakara was throwing him the ball. And his brother was a very highly touted prospect in his own right, who ended up not wanting to pursue football, but talented bloodlines, talented player. A little bit surprised he didn't get selected. The other guy that really jumps out for me is RJ Shelley. He's a corner out of the University of Manitoba. He's got some limitations. He's a bit stiff. He's gangly. He's a 6'5" guy out of Mission, BC. Maybe doesn't move as well as you hope, but super explosive. He had the longest broad jump at the virtual combine at 10.8, and he ran a 4.7. So has all the speed and explosiveness and insanely long arms. Just freakishly long arms. We don't have verified numbers for arm length this year, but on his YouTube channel, he calls them 37-inch arms. Now that would be insane. I don't think they're that big, but they are certainly more than 34-inch arms. And it's said that if you've got more than a 33-inch arm as a corner, it takes a tenth of a second off your 40 time for every inch. We're talking about a guy who should be running a 4.1 by that logic, right? He's got insanely long arms. So I'm surprised someone didn't take a flyer on him as well.
Well, JC, you've provided great insight on the stream all night long. We covered all 6 rounds, all 54 picks in written form. You can check out our colleague John Hodge's work. He details and analyzes every single pick on the site in an ongoing post. It'll continue to live up there. So any of your favorite players that you maybe tracked in U Sports or the NCAA, some of them obviously went to the NFL, you can check out there. Or if you're on the team side, and your favorite team has made a bunch of picks, you can check out the analysis of the new players that could potentially be coming to your team. We will have extensive draft coverage to follow, breaking it down, analysis. JC, I know you're going to be all over it. John Hodge, you and I will also be doing a podcast to break it all down. We'll get Hodge's perspective, see how he feels about his mock draft. I feel like generally overall, it was very well done. You guys had rankings to fill it all up. So now we analyze it, potentially grade it. I'm not the best grader. We'll leave that to you and Hodge to do those types of things, but some intriguing storylines coming up. How did you feel, though, overall about the draft in 2021 during a pandemic, putting it all together, trying to scout and get the notes together?
I mean, just to put things into perspective, I just want to point out how lucky we are right now to be talking about football, Canadian football, good Canadian kids getting a chance to play professionally. There's a lot of other things going on in the world and going on with this league, some things that really concern people like me who care about this and care about Canadian content and Canadian kids getting an opportunity. And we saw so many tremendous players go off the board today, guys who I think are going to make an impact for CFL teams, people who are going to develop into starters, that maybe if some of the changes that are being proposed or talked about or discussed behind closed doors happen, these same guys won't get those opportunities. And so I really want to take a moment and pause and reflect on that, of how lucky we are to have that right now and how important it is to fight for it. And that's something I'll be doing for 3 Down Nation for as long as it takes.
Very well said. So keep it locked to the site, 3downnation.com. All kinds of draft coverage coming your way. JC, you absolutely were a stud tonight. A first-round pick in my mind with your analysis. Thanks for being my partner. We're now over the 3.5-hour mark, so we'll let some of our viewers get some sleep. Maybe check out the site before you go to bed, and you as well. We're going to need some food and get some water in us so we can keep going with the draft coverage, JC. But, man, you rocked it. Any final thoughts?
Thanks for having me on, and now I have to take down this entire setup, which should be really, really fun.
Love the Russ Jackson jersey, by the way. All right, we'll send you out. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And as I mentioned, keep it locked to 3downnation.com for all the goodness.